If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 1, Lucas. In New York City, within Manhattan's East Village, there existed a certain apartment. This space was meager, comprising only a small room, a bunk bed, and a desk. It was minimalistic, to say the least. Seated on the floor was a young blonde man with striking blue eyes and reasonably attractive features, though by American standards, his looks were rather ordinary. Weariness seemed to shadow his gaze as he let out a sigh. Damn it! I've somehow found myself inhabiting the life of a less fortunate kid. Indeed, the young man was no longer who he appeared to be, he was now possessed by a different soul. This young man's name happened to be Lucas Knight, formerly a waiter at a local bar. However, due to a minor blunder, he had been unceremoniously let go by his boss, rendering him jobless. For the past 2 weeks, Lucas Knight had been tirelessly seeking employment, yet for some baffling reason, no one had offered him a position. It all culminated in his untimely death due to stress and exhaustion on this fateful day. Simultaneously, another Lucas from Earth, a failed actor, also met his demise. This second Lucas found himself transmigrated into the body of Lucas Knight. As he stood up and examined his surroundings, his eyes fell upon a notebook resting on the desk. Curiosity led him to pick it up and flip it open, only to discover that it belonged to Lucas Knight, serving as a diary. Lucas began to read, and the first page revealed a poignant story. How do I put this? I was born at the cost of my mother's life, and my father has always treated me with indifference as a result. When I was 7, my father remarried, and I soon realized he had been unfaithful, as he already had children older than me from this new marriage. When I turned 18, my stepmother's influence led my father to kick me out of the house. Now I'm 19, and I've been working as a waiter at a ladies' bar. I've faced constant harassment, but whenever I expressed discomfort, people simply laughed. Lucas skimmed through the pages, contemplating the story. After several minutes, he completed the diary and muttered in amazement, "So, I'm the son of Vince Knight, the renowned WB director." He added, "And my step-brother, 2 years my senior, is already making a name for himself in Hollywood." In fact, Lucas Knight also aspired to become an actor, but he faced continuous rejections despite his striking good looks when he attended auditions. He glanced at his wallet and discovered that he had only $50 left. Taking the paper money and inspecting it closely, he couldn't help but smile wistfully. How am I going to survive on this? If not for his roommate, he might have been starving all this time. His roommate had a job and was striving for his dream of becoming a Hollywood star, living independently to pursue that dream. Lucas glanced at the calendar, noting that it was May 9, 2009. As he contemplated his situation, his stomach grumbled in hunger. Lucas massaged his belly and decided to step out of the apartment to buy some food. He roamed the streets and entered a McDonald's, where he purchased a cheeseburger and fries, costing him at least $7 to ease his hunger. Upon leaving McDonald's and about to take a bite of his burger, he spotted a thin, homeless old man with a beard on the side of the street. Lucas examined his burger and noticed the homeless man seated on a public bench, clutching a bag of plastic trash. Lucas approached the homeless man and extended his offer of food. The old man, taken aback by Lucas's gesture, questioned as he peered at the McDonald's bag being offered, "What's this, young man?" Lucas beamed, presenting the McDonald's meal. "This is for you." The old man, filled with surprise, inquired with wonder, "For me?" Lucas nodded, handing the old man the McDonald's, burger included. "Thank you very much, young man," the old man expressed his gratitude with tears welling up in his eyes. It had been a while since anyone had shown him such kindness. Lucas nodded and was about to walk away when the old man blessed him, saying, "God bless you, young man." Lucas acknowledged the blessing as he walked away, taking a moment to assess his remaining funds. Due to his impromptu act of kindness, he had purchased another McDonald's meal, depleting his money even further. With a monthly rent of $700, luckily shared with his roommate, and no job currently, Lucas grappled with how to make ends meet when he suddenly realized something. Wasn't he an actor? When Lucas realized this, a moment of revelation silenced him. Though he had been a failed actor in his previous life, rarely securing major roles and mostly settling for supporting or extra roles, it had still been an invaluable experience to draw from. After that, he returned to his apartment, and upon entering, he noticed his roommate was already there. His roommate had dark hair and brown eyes, possessing fine features that made him a handsome young man. From the diary Lucas had read, this dark-haired young man went by the name of Paul Sterling. He stood a bit taller than Lucas, who was 5 feet 11 inches, while Paul Sterling measured about 6 feet. Upon noticing Lucas, Paul Sterling smiled and greeted him, saying, "You're here, Lucas," nodding in a friendly manner. Lucas returned the nod and sat on the floor, offering his own greeting, "What's up?" He didn't really know Paul Sterling since he hadn't inherited Lucas Knight's memories. Paul Sterling then mentioned, "I heard you've been struggling to find a job." He had observed that Lucas Knight had been having difficulty securing employment for the past 2 weeks. Lucas nodded with a sense of helplessness and admitted, "That's true. I feel quite lost, not knowing how to earn money to cover my rent." Paul Sterling then disclosed something that took Lucas by surprise, "I was offered an audition for a role in a TV series, but I didn't feel it suited me, so I decided not to go for it. However, if you're interested, I can give you the script and see if you'd like to audition for it." Paul Sterling concluded his statement and retrieved the script from his bag, which lay on the floor. Lucas, in the meantime, was taken aback by this revelation and the sight of Paul Sterling handing him the script paper. With curiosity, Lucas mused, "A TV series? I wonder what it's about." His words caught Paul Sterling's attention. Paul Sterling chuckled as he remarked, "The offer is $13,000 per episode, which is not too shabby and could certainly help with your financial troubles." Lucas, upon hearing this, felt a surge of excitement. After all, $13,000 was a substantial amount in his view. As he glanced at the script paper, he read the title on the front, Modern Family. Seeing the title, Lucas's mind practically went blank with excitement. He thought to himself, "Isn't this one of the successful TV series from my previous life?" His heart raced with anticipation. Paul Sterling remained silent, observing Lucas's expressions. Subsequently, Lucas opened the script and realized that the role for the audition was Dylan, the boyfriend of Haley Dunphy. "This is the character from the pilot," Lucas thought excitedly, glancing at Paul Sterling. He asked, "Are you sure you want to offer me this opportunity?" Paul Sterling was slightly surprised by Lucas's reaction but nodded, replying, "Of course." He paused before adding, "But don't thank me just yet, your ability to secure the role will depend on your audition performance." Lucas nodded hurriedly and then, with some embarrassment, asked, "Could you lend me some money so I can?" Paul Sterling chuckled, interrupting Lucas, and said, "So you can get to the audition site." Lucas nodded, feeling a bit embarrassed. He had no other choice, as he only had about $36 in his wallet. Paul Sterling recognized Lucas's predicament and sighed, "You better pay me back later, all right?" With that, he retrieved $200 from his wallet. Lucas nodded and reassured Paul Sterling, "Of course, I'll definitely pay you back later. You can count on it." Chapter 2, Julie. Lucas eagerly went to the audition location for Modern Family at the New Amsterdam Theatre. He was so excited that he had trouble sleeping the night before. He even asked his friend Paul Sterling a few times if it was okay to pursue this opportunity, but Paul assured him that he had landed a role in a Law and Order TV series. This reassurance made Lucas feel better, thinking that if Paul believed in the potential success of Modern Family, he might later regret missing out. As Lucas arrived at the theatre, he noticed a significant crowd already gathered. Lucas was about to take a seat when he spotted a woman who seemed familiar. In shock, he wondered, "Isn't she Claire?" Indeed, in a nearby seat was the blonde woman who portrayed Claire Dunphy, but that wasn't what shocked Lucas. He was taken aback because the actress who played Claire Dunphy had a visibly pregnant belly. Yes, she was pregnant. Lucas scanned the room to see if any other actors or actresses from Modern Family were present, but all he found were unfamiliar faces. As a result, Lucas felt a bit disappointed, but he decided to approach the blonde woman. As he neared her, she seemed slightly surprised but nodded and asked, "Can I help you with something?" Lucas shook his head and inquired, "May I sit here?" Gesturing to the unoccupied seat next to her, to which she simply nodded. She replied, "You don't need my permission, I don't own this place." Lucas smiled and responded, "True, but I thought it might be considerate to ask, in case it makes you uncomfortable." She smiled back and said, "Not at all." Lucas nodded and shifted his attention to the stage where the auditions were currently underway. He noticed a man with glasses, an older man, and another man who appeared to be in his 30s, among a few others, sitting with their elbows on a table, strategically positioned to assess the auditioning individuals. Turning to the blonde woman, Lucas asked, "Are you here for an audition?" She chuckled and replied, "Isn't it obvious?" Lucas, feeling a bit embarrassed, ventured, "Let me take a guess at the role you're auditioning for." The woman chuckled and said, "Go ahead, give it a try." She watched as Lucas stroked his chin, seemingly deep in thought. Lucas, with an expression of sudden realization, remarked, "You're auditioning for the lead female role, aren't you?" The woman appeared somewhat surprised and asked, "How did you know?" Lucas interrupted her, responding, "How did I know? Well, considering the circumstances, most of the actresses here are probably trying out for the main role, right?" She chuckled and replied, "You might have a point there." Then, pausing thoughtfully, she added, "Let me guess your role. Are you auditioning for the main role as well?" Lucas promptly shook his head and said, "No, I'm auditioning for a supporting role." The woman was a bit disappointed that she had guessed incorrectly. Both she and Lucas were in the dark about the other characters in the script since the Modern Family producers had only provided a script for the character they were auditioning for. Realizing they hadn't introduced themselves yet, Lucas spoke up, "I forgot to introduce myself, I'm Lucas Knight." She nodded and introduced herself, "I forgot to introduce myself as well." Pausing for a moment, she reflected that despite appearing in several series, she was still relatively unknown. She suspected that Lucas recognized her, which might explain his approach, but she shook off these distracting thoughts and said, "My name is Julie Bowen." Lucas glanced at her pregnant belly and inquired, "You're pregnant?" Julie blushed slightly and confirmed, "Yes, I'm 8 months pregnant." Observing the concern on Lucas's face, she continued with a slightly downcast tone, "Honestly, I'm not sure if the producers will choose me because of this." In a confident tone, Lucas assured her, "Don't be discouraged. I'm sure you'll get the role." In truth, he knew that she would indeed secure the role. Julie assumed that Lucas was merely offering her words of comfort, so she gave a grateful nod and continued, "I've actually auditioned for this role a few times already." This revelation surprised Lucas, and he responded, "You have?" He had been unaware of this. Julie nodded and added, "I'm really fond of this character." Lucas acknowledged her passion and engaged in a conversation with Julie for a while. Eventually, it was Julie's turn to audition, and Lucas wished her, "Good luck." With a nod, Julie made her way to the stage, gently cradling her pregnant belly. In the theater, a few people couldn't help but notice Julie's prominent pregnancy, and whispers spread through the audience. Lucas, wearing a puzzled expression, scanned the room and then observed Julie taking the stage as she portrayed the role of Claire Dunphy. "I doubt she'll be accepted with that noticeable baby bump," a distant voice scoffed. Lucas chose to disregard the people gossiping, fully confident that Julie Bowen would secure the role regardless of their opinions. On the stage, Julie stood before the director, writers, and producers of Modern Family. She greeted them with a smile, saying, "Hi, I'm Julie Bowen. I'm here again to audition for the role of Claire Dunphy." One of the writers, a 30-year-old man named Stephen Leviton, responded, "I know," with a chuckle. "You've already auditioned quite a few times." Julie blushed and nodded, admitting, "I really like the role, after all." Her words caught the attention of an older man, Christopher Lloyd, who spoke up, "Well, even though you've auditioned several times, I still want to see you perform the script you haven't used in your previous auditions." He placed the script on the table and said, "You can start now." The director, Jason Weiner, handed Julie the script, and she began to read. After a while, she returned the script. Stephen Leviton then suggested, "You can take a seat, there's no need to remain standing as per the script we provided," casting a glance at Julie's pregnant stomach. Julie nodded and settled into a seat on the stage nearby. She fell into a brief silence as she fully immersed herself in the character of Claire Dunphy. With confidence, she delivered her lines, "I am a mother. I am a wife. I am a career woman. And I am juggling it all. But I wouldn't have it any other way," all while the camera captured her performance. Then, Julie turned to the camera and declared, "I'm Claire Dunphy, and this is my crazy life." Lucas observed Julie's audition and expressed his approval with a nod, convinced that Julie was undeniably destined for the role of Claire Dunphy. Chapter 3, Audition. After Julie Bowen finished her performance, Modern Family writers Stephen Leviton and Christopher Lloyd exchanged glances. Despite Julie's pregnancy, they believed she perfectly embodied the character of Claire Dunphy. Her tone and expressions truly captured Claire Dunphy for them. Jason Weiner observed the writers as Julie anxiously examined the producers' expressions, hoping they appreciated her performance. Julie thought, I hope they liked it. As Stephen Levitin nodded and complimented her, saying, it's a good performance. Julie responded with gratitude, thank you. However, Stephen Levitin added, but we'll contact you if you get the role. This words disappointed Julie, but she still nodded and replied, thank you. She left the stage, feeling judgment from others who had come to audition due to her pregnancy. Lucas observed Julie's exit and smiled, muttering, she probably didn't expect to be chosen in the end. Later, more people took the stage one by one, performing until it was finally Lucas's turn. He was identified by the number assigned to Auditiones. The audition coordinator called, number 69, Lucas Knight. Lucas raised his hand and noticed a few people chuckling. Feeling awkward, he scratched the back of his head and made his way to the stage. The Modern Family director, writers, and producers looked up at Lucas, and Jason Weiner asked, holding a paper, are you auditioning for the supporting role of Dylan Marshall? Lucas nodded and replied, that's correct. Jeff Greenberg, the casting director of Modern Family, wore a perplexed expression as he stated, as far as I can recall, we never cast someone named Lucas Knight for the supporting role of Dylan Marshall. Responsible for the casting process, he meticulously handpicked actors and actresses for specific roles within the show. From his recollection, while Dylan Marshall wasn't as prominent as the main characters, it still held significance, potentially appearing in several episodes. Jeff Greenberg remembered that aside from Paul Sterling and Reed Ewing, whom he and his team personally selected, a few actors had submitted their headshots and resumes for consideration, but Lucas Knight wasn't among them. The directors, writers, and producers of Modern Family regarded Lucas with furrowed brows. Lucas Knight, trying to address the situation, offered an awkward smile and admitted, That's correct. How should he explain this? Upon hearing Lucas's response, Jeff Greenberg directed his attention to Lucas Knight and elaborated, auditions for Modern Family are conducted discreetly, and only those specially chosen by me and my team are given the opportunity. Could it be that one of the actors we selected for the supporting role allowed you to audition on their behalf? I am certain that no one named Lucas Knight submitted a headshot and resume to me, so I can't think of any other explanation. His conclusion was hard to dispute, and the Modern Family directors and writers couldn't help but arrive at the same conclusion. In truth, actors or actresses could still audition for roles, even if they hadn't been directly selected by the casting director, as long as they were endorsed by a guild that submitted their headshots and resumes to Jeff Greenberg. The other people auditioning were intrigued by the situation as they observed Lucas Knight on the stage. Lucas, caught off guard by this unexpected turn of events, explained, my friend offered me his audition opportunity for the role of Dylan Marshall. Jeff Greenberg stroked his chin, recalling that the only people he had selected for the role of Dylan Marshall were Paul Sterling and Reed Ewing. Since Reed Ewing had already auditioned, and the only one who hadn't was Paul Sterling, he surmised that Paul Sterling had provided Lucas Knight with the script and audition chance for the role. With this realization, Jeff Greenberg exclaimed, so your friend was Paul Sterling? Lucas, upon hearing this, nodded with a hint of surprise. Stephen Levitin casually used his pinky finger to clean his ear as he commented, I'm not particularly concerned about whether you're supposed to be here or not. He paused, locking eyes with Lucas Knight, and added, however, since you are here, I assume you possess the ability to portray the role of Dylan Marshall effectively, right? Jeff Greenberg glanced at Stephen Levitin and then at Lucas Knight, nodding in agreement with Stephen Levitin's words. He added, did you hear that, young man? Do you have the acting ability, or are you just wasting our time? The fellow Auditiones cast various glances and expressed a range of emotions while observing Lucas Knight. With all eyes focused on him, Lucas sensed the weight of the moment and felt doubts creeping in. However, he reminded himself, I've already faced death once, so why should I be concerned about failing here? Determination welled up within him as he reflected, I failed as an actor in my past life due to this useless trait of doubt. After a few seconds of contemplation, and with everyone awaiting his response, Lucas confidently affirmed, of course. I can portray the role of Dylan Marshall effectively. The directors, writers, and producers of Modern Family were taken aback by Lucas's transformation, witnessing his shift from awkwardness to sudden confidence. Christopher Lloyd, a middle-aged individual, smiled and nodded to Lucas, remarking, I appreciate your confidence, young man. He paused and elaborated, but let me clarify the role of Dylan Marshall for you. He will be the boyfriend of the main character, Haley Dunphy. He's into music and likes to act cool. Can you embody that? All eyes turned to Lucas Knight as Christopher Lloyd posed the question, and Lucas promptly nodded, affirming, certainly. Stephen Levitan, wearing a smile, instructed, then you may begin. Lucas nodded, recalling the script that Paul Sterling had given him earlier. Lucas had memorized the lines, but he understood that it wasn't just about the words, his expression and overall acting would make all the difference. He immersed himself in the character of Dylan Marshall. Although he had only watched the first season of Modern Family, he aimed to portray Dylan from his perspective. In Lucas's view, Dylan Marshall wasn't a character who tried to act cool. He thought Christopher Lloyd's earlier statement was a test of his acting abilities. Ready? Action! The audition coordinator called out, signaling the start of the performance. The reader assigned to assist Lucas with his lines was prepared. Lucas composed his mind and became Dylan Marshall. His expression transformed into that of a laid-back individual, and his hands fiddled with his clothes. Director Jason Weiner, Jeff Greenberg, Stephen Levitan, and Christopher Lloyd were slightly taken aback by Lucas's transformation. Lucas exuded the aura of a slacker, appearing both uncomfortable and unsure of himself. Stephen Levitan and Christopher Lloyd exchanged glances. Judging from Lucas's current expression and posture, it appeared that he was portraying Dylan Marshall quite effectively, even though Christopher Lloyd had attempted to mislead Lucas earlier by characterizing Dylan Marshall as a simple character. This characterization could be both right and wrong simultaneously. If Lucas had followed Christopher Lloyd's advice exclusively, he wouldn't have stood a chance. However, whether Lucas could deliver his lines effectively remained to be seen, and this would ultimately determine his overall performance in their eyes. Chapter 4, Audition 2. In the New Amsterdam Theatre, Lucas stood center stage, with the directors, writers, and producers of Modern Family fixed on him, and the audience equally captivated by his flawless portrayal of Dylan Marshall. The camera and the Modern Family production team supporting the attendees all focused on Lucas Knight as he took his place on the stage. As the audition began, the female script reader, assisting Lucas Knight in his role as Dylan Marshall, approached him and cordially said, "Hello, you must be Dylan." Lucas Knight, embodying Dylan Marshall, stood before her, extending his hand for a handshake, and replied, "Hey, Dylan, yet." His voice remained composed, but his eyes conveyed a sense of uncertainty. The female audition reader took on the role of Claire as she shook hands with Lucas Knight and delivered her lines from the script, "I'm Haley's mother." Next, another male script reader, who would support Lucas Knight during his audition, stepped forward. He initiated the action by gently gripping Lucas Knight's forearm while assuming the role of Haley and encouraged, "Hey, come on, let's go," directing his words towards Lucas Knight. Lucas, playing Dylan Marshall, nodded in agreement and followed the male reader. Suddenly, the female reader interjected with a hint of surprise, exclaiming, "Okay, hang on, 1 second. Whoa!" She halted the male reader and Lucas, firmly gripping Lucas's forearm, causing him to look at her with uncertainty. The female reader continued to follow the script, asking with doubt, "Dylan, you're still in high school?" Lucas nodded and responded in a deep, relaxed voice, "Yeah, I'm a senior." The female reader acknowledged with a nod, saying, "A senior. Okay. Cool." Another male script reader, who was part of the audition process, approached. The female reader noticed and exclaimed, "Hey, Phil. Sweetie. Honey." She added, "He is Dylan, and he is a senior," before announcing aloud, "You need to scare him." The male reader then delivered his lines, saying, "Let me meet this player," as he glanced at Lucas. "Phil Dunphy, yo." The male reader, portraying Phil, exclaimed, adding with a playful tone, "Yo." Lucas, embodying Dylan, responded while looking at the male reader, saying, "Yo. Okay, I see you guys." The male reader, taking on the role of Haley, acknowledged as the other male reader, who portrayed Phil, supported Lucas in the audition performance. The audition continued, with the participants and the Modern Family production team watching closely. The directors and writers of Modern Family keenly observed Lucas Knight's performance, and he delivered exceptionally well. In fact, Stephen Levitan noted that Lucas Knight seemed to capture the essence of Dylan even better than Reed Ewing. Upon completing the audition, the directors and writers of Modern Family held varying opinions. Stephen Levitan nodded at Lucas Knight and complimented him, saying, "You gave a very impressive performance." Lucas Knight reciprocated with gratitude, saying, "Thank you. After some time, Christian Lloyd also shared his thoughts, and the directors, such as James Weiner and Jeff Greenberg, expressed their approval with nods. After a while, as Lucas Knight expressed his gratitude, the writer Stephen Levitin, idly playing with his pen, jotted a note and said, "Very well. We'll contact you if you're selected by the team." He paused, adding, "If you're not chosen, we'll still reach out to inform you that we regrettably didn't pick you. Expect a call in about a week when the shooting for the pilot is set to begin." Lucas Knight anticipated this and nodded, replying, "Thank you," before stepping off the stage to make way for another auditionee. The new individual was trying out for an extra role in the plane scene, and Lucas watched curiously, his own audition now concluded. He exited the theater and rubbed his hands together, hoping he would be selected. If not, he faced the daunting prospect of struggling to cover his rent unless he could persuade a friend or roommate to assist. Lucas flagged down a taxi, returned to his apartment, and pondered the events that had unfolded since he arrived in this unfamiliar world. He had the opportunity to meet Julie Bowen, a celebrity he had only watched on screens before. Surprisingly, she was pregnant, a fact he hadn't known in his previous life. Lucas couldn't help but smile, reflecting on Julie portraying Claire Dunphy in the pilot with her bulging stomach. It baffled him that he hadn't noticed this detail while watching the pilot in his past life. As for his current situation, whether Lucas would be selected for the role of Dylan Marshall remained uncertain. After all, Reed Ewing had originally played the part in his previous life. Lucas was unsure if he'd be chosen or if Reed Ewing would once again secure the role. With no guarantees, Lucas couldn't solely rely on the possibility of being chosen. He needed to secure some form of employment. With this in mind, he picked up his diary and recorded the events of the New Amsterdam theatre auditions before setting out to search for job opportunities. Lucas vowed that if he wasn't selected for the role of Dylan Marshall, he would explore other possibilities. Perhaps he would even consider auditioning for America's Got Talent the following year, although this was his final option if he couldn't secure any opportunities in the entertainment industry. To pave his way into the entertainment industry as a newcomer, he knew that joining the Screen Actors Guild was crucial, but doing so required fees. He contemplated either borrowing money once more from his roommate or embarking on an intensive job search to cover the expenses. Lucas diligently scoured the area for job opportunities when he noticed a restaurant with a sign that read "Wanted, Waiter." In an instant, Lucas smoothed down his blonde hair and straightened his sleeves. It seemed that the restaurant had just put up the wanted sign, as Lucas hadn't noticed it earlier when he passed by on his way to a fast food restaurant. Upon entering the restaurant and expressing his interest in applying at the counter, he was greeted by the restaurant's manager, who was also the employer. The young and beautiful female manager didn't inquire about Lucas's educational background, she simply asked about his work experience and assessed his communication skills, which were satisfactory. She also inquired about his record, and after a background check, the female manager named Liza examined Lucas's face and physique before nodding in approval. She said, "All right, you look pretty good," pausing before adding, "You're hired. Your hourly wage here will be $12. Is that acceptable to you?" Lucas quickly nodded and replied, "That's perfectly fine." After expressing his gratitude and discussing the details for a while, he exited the restaurant. Liza smiled as she watched Lucas depart. To be honest, she was quite intrigued because a man employed by Mila, a woman, had offered her $1,000 not to hire an individual by the name of Lucas Knight. Similar offers had been made by other men, who worked for Mila, to Liza's friends, all of whom owned businesses in New York. However, Liza was not particularly swayed by the promise of $1,000 and opted to hire Lucas regardless, partly due to her finding him exceptionally charming and handsome. Chapter 5, Expectations. Lucas went to his apartment and saw that his roommate still hadn't returned, so he ate instant ramen and slept in the lower bunk bed. As he lay on the bed, his mind constantly pondered whether he would be cast as Dylan Marshall in the Modern Family casting. The casting could significantly benefit Lucas in the entertainment industry and might lead to recommendations for other projects. While thinking about this, his mind became hazy as he drifted into slumber. In the morning, sunlight streamed across Lucas's face through the apartment window. HNG. Lucas stretched his arms, yawning as he awoke. Then, he stood up lazily and went to the bathroom to brush his teeth. Afterward, he had breakfast before heading to the restaurant where he had applied. Upon reaching the restaurant, the female manager, Liza, instructed him to change into the waiter attire. "You shouldn't be wearing casual clothes now, should you?" Feeling awkward, Lucas responded, Liza smiled and said, go to the changing room. There's already a waiter attire waiting for you. Lucas immediately nodded and headed to the changing room. Upon arrival, he noticed another guy already changing. Oh, you must be the new guy. The man, with red hair and a shining earring, was still shirtless, wearing only the formal black waiter pants. Lucas nodded, searching for his attire. The guy remarked, if you're looking for your working uniform, you don't have one. Confused, Lucas furrowed his brows, but the manager said I have one here. The guy chuckled, maybe she just wanted you to borrow a uniform from me. Lucas considered this possibility, I see. Awkwardly, he asked, can I borrow one? The guy chuckled, hee, you're quite an interesting fellow. Opening his locker, he tossed an arranged waiter uniform to Lucas. By the way, I'm Leonard Martin, nice to meet you, the red-haired guy introduced himself. Lucas nodded, greeting, nice to meet you, Leonard. I'm Lucas Knight. Leonard, upon hearing Lucas's last name, smiled, oh, so you're a knight. Lucas, while getting dressed, furrowed his brows, is there something wrong? Leonard shook his head, adjusting his uniform, nothing. After putting on the waiter attire, Lucas and Leonard went out to work, serving customers and receiving tips. Initially surprised by the tips, Lucas soon realized he was in the USA, unlike his home country. So, he actually earned more with the tips from customers and the hourly wages. The job finally concluded as the restaurant closed for the day. Liza smiled charmingly, looking at Lucas as she handed him his salary. With a charming smile, Liza said to Lucas, you did great. Maybe it's your newcomer's luck, but the restaurant received more customers than average. Good job. Lucas responded with a smile, saying, thank you, manager. Liza pouted at Lucas's response, correcting him, don't call me manager, Lucas. Just call me Liza. Though reluctant, Lucas smiled when he heard that. Liza saw his hesitation and encouraged, come on, I'm fine with it. Lucas nodded, smiling, and said, all right, Liza. Liza smiled upon hearing it, patting Lucas on the shoulder, that's right. No need to be uncomfortable with me, Lucas. I am not stuttering while saying your name, well, you'll probably get used to it. While Lucas and Liza were interacting with smiles, Leonard, still waiting for his salary, kept observing with a frown. What is this, manager? Are you playing favorites right now? Leonard couldn't help but exclaim. When Liza heard this from Leonard, she looked over at him and snorted. I saw you glued to your Nokia phone all the time while you're working. You're not as serious as Mr. Lucas. She said with furrowed brows. Then she added, maybe you'll become my favorite as well if I confiscate your phone during your shift. Upon hearing this, Leonard surrendered, raising his hand and saying, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Please don't confiscate my phone, cousin. Humph, get your things together. You will get your money a week later. Eh? How could that be? Lucas will receive his today, but I'll receive my money in a week? That's unfair, you busy. I change my mind. You'll receive your money in 2 weeks. No. Please. I beg you. I need that money for my date. Seems like no date for you then. At least about 2 weeks before you get your money from me. I'll sue you. If you can. Lucas smiled as he observed their banter. Honestly, he didn't expect the red-haired man to be a relative of his boss. After that, Lucas returned to his apartment, lying in the lower bunk bed, and looked at his flip phone screen. He awaited a call from the Modern Family production, whether he was cast for the role or not. Lucas truly desired to be cast, it was a significant opportunity for him. He closed his flip phone and went back to sleep. A few days later, Lucas groggily woke up, rubbing his eyes to see the surroundings clearly. He stood up, went to pour himself some water. The morning sun's rays pierced through the window, gracing Lucas's face. Lucas drank and gulped the water, saying, I guess it's time for breakfast and then off to work. Before he could take any actions, his phone rang, and the Nokia ringtone sounded. Taken aback at first, Lucas took his phone, wondering who could be calling him right now. Looking at the phone, it was an unfamiliar number, so Lucas answered. Hello, who is this? Lucas asked. This is Mr. Knight. A female voice sounded on his phone. Lucas answered, yeah, I am Lucas Knight. Confused about who could be calling him so early in the morning, he suddenly remembered that he was supposed to be contacted by the Modern Family production, right? As he thought about it, Lucas became visibly excited. Mr. Knight, I am from the Modern Family production. Chapter 6, Off to Los Angeles. After a few days since the Modern Family production, called Lucas. Lucas still went to the restaurant as usual, and after working for quite a while, he told Liza that he would only be able to work for a few hours before asking for a leave. Liza was a bit surprised, but when she inquired about the reason why, Lucas just informed her that it was about the fact that he would go to act in a TV series. What? You're telling me that you'll participate in a TV series? Liza exclaimed when she heard that Lucas would go act in a TV series. You can't be serious, right, mate? Leonard was also a bit surprised and asked in astonishment. Lucas chuckled when he saw their reaction, smiled, and said, it was only a supporting role. Not like I was a main cast or something. And then he added shyly, besides, it was just the pilot episode. I don't know for sure if I'll appear in frequent episodes after that, right? Liza and Leonard exchanged glances, and then Leonard walked in front of Lucas, patted his shoulder heavily, and said, hey, don't underestimate yourself. Besides, even if you are just a supporting role, you'll still appear on the screen. Many people will be able to see you on television. That's fantastic. You know what? My dream as a child was to become famous and appear on television. And you are already achieving. Before Leonard could finish his speech, Liza pushed him aside and interrupted him. She then said to Lucas, young man, oh, young man. I didn't expect this at all. To become an actor? I really didn't expect this from you. Lucas felt a bit awkward, and thoughts wandered, what could you have expected from me? At first, I thought you were just some pretty face I picked up from the street, but it looks like you're not just a pretty face, you're actually an actor. Liza smiled as she recounted with a thoughtful expression, patting Lucas on the shoulder. Lucas felt a bit embarrassed and intended to move slightly away. But then, he heard Liza saying, Lucas, if you become famous, make sure to promote my restaurant, all right? Liza said with a smile, hooking her shoulder against Lucas, not allowing him to create some distance at all. Lucas felt a bit awkward as his face blushed from the close distance with the manager, a beauty with a finely shaped body. Being so close to him, Lucas could even feel Liza's breath brushing his cheeks and the fragrance reaching his nose. I'll promote your restaurant if I become famous, don't worry. Lucas said with a smile, looking directly into Liza's eyes, breaking free from her grasp, and creating some distance. When Liza noticed this, she smiled and thought, oh, he's a shy boy, I see. Liza smiled upon seeing the inexperienced lamb distancing himself from her. She began to develop some ideas. Leonard, who was just pushed by Liza, looked at her with narrowed eyes and said to Lucas, who had just distanced himself, Lucas, don't mind my cousin. She's just like that, a bit. Before Leonard could continue, Liza interrupted him. Looks like you want your salary to be cut in half, then. When Leonard heard that, he continued his speech, but the words were not really what he intentionally wanted to say. He altered it by saying, a beautiful maiden. Yeah, my cousin is just like that, Lucas. After that, Leonard approached Lucas, patted him on the shoulder, and said, I can understand why you are very shy right now. With such a beautiful maiden like my cousin being so close to you, I can understand your feelings. After saying all of that, Leonard glanced at Liza with eyes that were different from the praise he was preaching, his eyes were pleading when looking at Liza. When Liza saw that, she sighed and said, all right, maybe you can get your full salary. Just better watch your words next time. Leonard was about to snort, but then he saw Liza's frowning expression, so he just smiled at Lucas while patting his shoulder, good luck with your role. Lucas, who was able to see what just happened, noted the shift in expression and words of Leonard, like the changing of pages in a book. Thank you. Lucas nodded and said. By the way, Lucas, what is the name of the TV series you're about to participate in? Liza asked as she looked at Lucas. Leonard also looked at Lucas with a curious expression. Lucas smiled and said, the TV series is named Modern Family. Make sure to watch it if it airs. We'll certainly watch it. Don't worry, Lucas. Leonard smiled as he said. Yeah, although I am your boss and you are asking for an early leave, I'll allow it since the TV series must be your first project and opportunity. Good luck to you, kid. Liza nodded and also encouraged Lucas. Lucas nodded as he looked at the two people. To be honest, these people are just the ones he has met recently, yet so far, Lucas felt more attached to them compared to his roommate. While Lucas was confused about why Liza kept talking as if he were a junior when he could clearly see that she seemed not older than him, he also slowly and gradually saw her as an older sister. "Thank you." Lucas smiled and said gratefully before adding, "I'll be off now." Liza and Leonard nodded, both offering words of encouragement. "Do your best, kid." Liza nodded with a smile. After Lucas spoke with Liza and borrowed some money, he left. Leonard walked Lucas out of the restaurant. When Liza was left in the office, she smiled and thought, it looks like it was a good choice to accept the kid, although there is someone out there who seems to have a beef with him. Lucas hailed a taxi and headed to the airport to reach the filming locations of the Modern Family pilot. The location was in Los Angeles, Cheviot Hills, and to get there as fast as possible, Lucas needed to take a flight. He had already booked a flight a few days ago. Lucas managed to borrow some money from his supportive boss, Liza. She willingly gave him $2,000, even though Lucas only needed a few $100s. He tried to refuse the large amount, but she insisted, so Lucas could only promise to pay it back as soon as he received his earnings from acting as Marshall Dillon. Liza just smiled at that time. Lucas smiled as he remembered it. He felt fortunate to have such a boss in this life. He swore that if he became famous and rich, he would invite her to dinner. Chapter 7, Dream. After Lucas's plane landing and reaching the Los Angeles International Airport, Lucas goes to one of the restaurants in the terminal, and he relaxes in Wolfgang Puck Grand Café. After eating some American cuisine, Lucas goes to the taxi stands to fetch a taxi to drive him to Cheviot Hills. After entering the taxi and telling the driver the locations he wanted to go, Lucas curiously looks at the brochures and pamphlets given by Lax near the airport earlier. To be honest, Lucas has never even been to an American airport or something. So far, he has only traveled locally in his previous life country. In fact, even if he goes to an airport and takes a flight, it's only a local travel within the country and not outside the country at all. He was just a small-time actor in his previous life. Lucas flips through the brochures first to read while the taxi drives off on the road. While reading, the taxi driver is listening to the Godfather soundtrack. Lucas immediately recognizes the soundtrack as it is so familiar. Lucas even hums in sync with the soundtrack, remembering the days when he watched The Godfather as a kid. He can say that it was such a masterpiece. He watched the whole film of Part 1 without getting bored and then proceeded to watch Part 2, a full 3 hours, without getting bored at all. Lucas was easily bored in his previous life, and if he watched a film that didn't impress or occupy his mind for 10 minutes, he would not watch it at all. Instead, he would read some books such as Song of Ice and Fire for some time. Yet, even with his mindset, he was able to fully watch Part 1 and Part 2 of The Godfather without getting bored or losing focus. Well, of course, except for Part 3, which he couldn't stand to watch. The Godfather was a great film, even when it screened in the 1970s. For Lucas, the film aged like wine. Actually, it was because of The Godfather that Lucas became an actor. He was inspired by Al Pacino, who portrayed Michael Corleone. Pacino's portrayal, transitioning from a heroic war hero with a hint of innocence to a cold underworld boss, was admirable. Lost in thought, Lucas analyzed the great actors in The Godfather. He considered Marlon Brando, who played Vito Corleone, the first Godfather and Michael's father. Brando's portrayal shaped the character of the mafia boss with stiff yet intimidating movements. He adopted a hunched posture and deliberate movements to embody Vito's age and physical weight. Brando's piercing eyes conveyed a range of emotions, from quiet contemplation to veiled menace. Subtle gestures, like stroking his chin or holding a cigarette, emphasized points or conveyed unspoken thoughts. Brando's unique gravelly voice, influenced by his Brooklyn roots and Italian heritage, added authenticity and distinction. As Lucas reflected on Brando's acting skills, he also admired Al Pacino's portrayal of Michael Corleone. Pacino, a great actor in Lucas's eyes, left a lasting impression, especially with his role in Scarface. Thinking of that, Lucas couldn't help but smile. While it might sound presumptuous, Lucas was indeed inspired to become an actor because of crime thriller films, and he dreamed of acting in one. Besides being inspired by The Godfather, with Marlon Brando and Al Pacino, Lucas also came to know truly great actors such as Daniel Day-Lewis, Meryl Streep, Robert De Niro, and Denzel Washington, Jack Nicholson. Lucas hoped to stand on the same stage as them and, in fact, had thoughts of even surpassing them one day. It was just his dream, limitless and free to imagine anything he wanted, even if it meant risking his life. Great soundtrack there, sir, Lucas smiled, saying to the driver listening to the Godfather soundtracks. Haha, of course, the burly driver responded with a smile. After a while, he spoke with melancholic eyes, to be honest with you, listening to these soundtracks helps me feel like I'm driving for an underworld boss. He glanced at Lucas while saying so. Lucas, hearing that, looked at the driver in surprise, finding him quite peculiar for thinking that way. Does he think he drives for the Godfather? A driver for an underworld boss? Lucas avoided the taxi driver's stare while pondering. Usually, people feel like they're the Godfather listening to that soundtrack, yet this taxi driver thinks he's a driver for some big boss. Feeling a bit awkward due to the silence, Lucas remarked, usually, people listening to that soundtrack feel like they're a big shot, but you, sir, just think you're a driver for some big shot. The taxi driver chuckled at Lucas's words and replied, haha, my dream is not so big. I know my limits. My dream is for one day to become a driver for some big shot. He paused and added, a big shot like the Godfather. Lucas smiled wryly, saying, I see. Inside, he thought, I guess that makes sense. Afterward, the burly driver handed a card to Lucas, who took it in confusion. Then the taxi driver said, this is my contact card. I give them to my passengers, but not casually. I give them to people I think will make it big one day. When Lucas heard this, he was a bit surprised and said, oh. You think I'll make it big one day? The taxi driver responded with a laugh, haha, well, just my mind telling me something like that. As long as I see people my mind thinks have potential, I give them my contact cards. Oh? Is it a card to call you when I need a taxi? Lucas couldn't help but say with a wry and faint smile. Of course, but it's not just that. The taxi driver smiled and then added, I'm giving you my contact card, sir, because if you become big someday, or maybe you're just about to make it big and still on the path to success, please remember my contact card and hire me as your personal driver. When Lucas heard this, he didn't know whether to feel happy or not. He felt happy that someone thought he would make it big someday, but at the same time, he felt a strange feeling, like pressure, knowing that someone had high expectations of him. It was the belief that he would make it big when he knew it wouldn't be easy, and perhaps it might never happen at all. The taxi driver seemed to sense some doubt in Lucas's eyes and said, hey, kid. Don't doubt yourself. You will have your day someday. Just believe in the great above and yourself. Lucas, hearing this, nodded with a smile. With that, he found the conversation with the taxi driver more comforting. The taxi driver, named Sean, has a son and a daughter. He didn't mention his wife but said that he was supporting his son and daughter. When Lucas asked why his build was quite burly, like a bodybuilder, Sean explained that he was indeed a bodybuilder in the past. Due to circumstances, he applied for the job of a taxi driver to support his son and daughter. While talking, the taxi driver reminded Lucas that they were nearing the neighborhood of Cheviot Hills. Chapter 8, Filming Set. When Lucas arrived at the Cheviot Hills, he looked around and saw the American houses and neighborhood he typically saw in American series or movies. Cheviot Hills was just near the well-known Beverly Hills and Century City, yet the quiet and peaceful area made Lucas feel that it was a good place for seniors and a place to live after retirement. I guess maybe because of this quiet area that the production of Modern Family chose this place for filming. Lucas thought as he walked along the quiet road. Lucas was on his way towards the private residence, the one rented by the Modern Family production. Then, Lucas remembered the contract provided by the Modern Family production a few days ago. Although Lucas doesn't have an agent or manager to deal with it for him, he read the contract and so far, he doesn't see any clause that will be bad for him. Basically, the contract provided was only limited to the pilot episode. He'll also earn the money provided in the contract after finishing filming the pilot episode. Whether Lucas will receive a contract beyond the pilot episode depends on how successful the pilot episode of the show will be. If the show becomes successful and the network is satisfied with the pilot, which Lucas expects, he may receive a full-time contract, covering the entire season or several seasons, higher compensation and job security for Lucas. This would mean he can earn thousands of dollars just for appearing in episodes, but it also requires Lucas's commitment to the show, potentially restricting his ability to pursue other projects simultaneously. The Modern Family production team was already prepared, and the director and writers gathered at a table to discuss the pilot episode. Some of the actors and actresses were already present, and Julie Bowen's presence drew significant attention from the production team and the cast. Not because she is famous, but because she has a bulging belly. The actor Ty Burrell, who plays the role of Phil Dunphy, looked at Julie Bowen, who has taken on the role as Phil Dunphy's wife. He observed people such as Sarah Hyland, Ariel Winter, Nolan Gould, the children of the Dunphy couple in the show, talking to Julie Bowen with curiosity and a bit of interest. Although the actors and actresses greeted each other upon first meeting, there was still a bit of unfamiliarity among them. However, as the director and writers suggested, they needed to get along well since the show was about family and not just drama. Ty Burrell sat near Julie Bowen and curiously listened. After a while, he joined in the conversation, talking with Julie and even making a light-hearted joke about her pregnancy. After a while, Lucas finally arrived at the filming location and saw the iconic Dunphy house from his previous life in front of him. Lucas looked and noticed that the production team had already gathered. Vans and cables, thick as garden hoses, snaked across the driveway. He also observed a group of curious neighbors perched on lawn chairs across the street, watching the Modern Family production team in action. The house known as the Dunphy house from Lucas's previous life had shed its usual facade of normalcy. Lights, resembling giant fireflies on steroids, clung to the eaves, casting an artificial glow on the manicured rose bushes. Cameras, perched on towering cranes, peered through the house windows, ready to capture and film the inside of the rooms. A steady stream of crew members scurried in and out, their bright orange lanyards flashing like traffic cones in the sunlight. This scene was markedly different from what Lucas had seen of the TV show in his previous life, but he had been expecting this. Indeed, Lucas had underestimated the production team, expecting a small crew that wouldn't attract much attention. However, it turned out that the production team was larger than he initially thought. Being a small actor in his previous life, Lucas didn't really know the extent of the filming set in Hollywood. After approaching the house, he was stopped by a staff member. Only when Lucas explained that he was part of the cast playing the role of Marshall Dillon in the show was he allowed to enter. As he stepped inside the house, Lucas saw the familiar interior of the Dunphy family home. Although Lucas was a bit surprised that the episode would actually take place on the on-site location of the exterior scene, typically TV show houses would have an exterior scene, and the interior shots would be on the soundstage of a studio. Perhaps 20th Century Fox hadn't yet recreated the interior sets of Modern Family in their studio. They might have used the on-site house as the filming location, unsure if Modern Family would be well received by the audience or not. Lucas was led by the staff towards the living room where the cast, director, and writers were gathered. Along the way, Lucas could see crew members walking around the house, preparing everything for filming. Some were shouting to each other, even though they were wearing headsets equipped with microphones. Experiencing this scene, Lucas felt like he had returned to his previous life when he had a chance to be an extra in a certain Love Team movie project. Upon entering the living room, Lucas saw the familiar faces of the Modern Family actors and actresses. 2 actors, Ty Burrell and Nolan Gould, and 3 actresses, Julie Bowen, Sarah Hyland, and Ariel Winter, were present. All present seemed to be only the Dunphy family cast, and the other main casts, such as the Pritchett family, were not there. When the staff leading Lucas announced the arrival of another actor, it captured the attention of the casts, director, and writers in the room. They looked, and some of them sighed in relief that the actor had arrived on time. Jason Weiner glanced at Lucas and nodded, while Stephen Levitin observed Lucas thoughtfully. To be honest, they casted Lucas Knight, despite only auditioning once, because of his good looks, blonde hair, blue eyes. They felt that the character Dylan seemed to suit Lucas more, and at the same time, Lucas's embodiment of Dylan resonated well with the writers. The network also agreed with casting Lucas due to his very American yet charming appearance. However, they weren't entirely sure whether the young man would meet their acting expectations. Nevertheless, since it was just a supporting role, the role of Marshall Dillon didn't demand much acting, and any performance shortcomings wouldn't be quite apparent. Chapter 9, Interaction. The moment Lucas appeared, the actors and actresses turned their attention to him, eager to see the actor they would work with later. But when Julie saw Lucas, she gasped in astonishment and exclaimed, "Lucas!" Lucas, who had just entered the room, turned his attention to Julie, responding to her call. As he saw her, he smiled and approached her. "Hey, I knew you would make it." Lucas smiled, but unexpectedly, Julie stood up slowly and hugged him as a greeting. Hee, I myself wouldn't have thought I'd be cast. I even begged to secure the role, you know. Julie laughed softly. It's true, to lend herself a role, she begged the directors and writers each time she auditioned, except the last one. At that time, being pregnant, Lucas had encouraged her after the audition. Lucas also hugged lightly as a greeting before supporting Julie to sit. Clearly concerned about her bulging stomach, he asked, "Well, how are you?" After Julie sat on the sofa. "I'm doing fine," Julie said with a smile. Meanwhile, the other actors and actresses observed Lucas and Julie conversing. Ty Burrell said to Julie, "It seems you already know him." Sarah Hyland and Ariel Winter also glanced at Lucas. "Yeah, we met at the audition." "I didn't expect Lucas to be picked," Julie said with a faint smile. "You didn't expect me to be picked? You don't trust my ability, do you?" Lucas teased Julie. Although they didn't really know each other, Lucas wanted to gradually get along well with her and the other actors and actresses of the TV series. I didn't mean it that way, just surprise is all," Julie embarrassedly explained. She hadn't thought about her choice of words and assumed Lucas must have misunderstood. Lucas smiled and just laughed lightly, saying, "I'm just teasing you. No need to be uncomfortable." When Julie heard that, she sighed in relief. Afterward, Ty Burrell cast a favorable glance at Lucas, forming a positive first impression. He greeted Lucas, saying, "Your name's Lucas? Well, I am Ty Burrell, nice to meet you," as they shook hands. "Lucas Knight," Lucas replied with a smile. After the handshake with Ty Burrell, he turned his attention to the three young talents nearby. From Lucas's memories, they were the ones who portrayed the children of the Dunphy family. Quietly observing Sarah Hyland, he noticed her outgoing personality as she discussed their characters with Ariel Winter, holding scripts in hand. Nolan Gould, the kid known for playing the dumb character in Modern Family, surprised Lucas by appearing quite intelligent while flipping through the paper scripts. Lucas was accustomed to seeing him act dumb, but this was real life, after all. After this brief observation, Lucas introduced himself to the young actors. Lucas observed that Ariel Winter, who played the role of Alex Dunphy, appeared more reserved than her sarcastic and clever character. During a conversation with Sarah and Ariel, Lucas noticed Ariel glancing at a certain direction occasionally. Following her gaze, he saw a black-haired woman, somewhat chubby but still attractive, with features resembling Ariel. Lucas assumed it must be Ariel's mother, evident from the woman's attentive demeanor towards Ariel. Responding to Sarah Hyland's inquiry about his role, Lucas explained, "My role is Dylan, the crush of Haley." "Crush of I mean, my role's crush? I think they're already a couple, right?" Sarah stuttered initially, then corrected herself as she glanced at the scripts. "Boyfriend already? Was it written like that?" Lucas expressed a bit of surprise before perusing the scripts provided by the crew. "Well, I guess the relationship of Dylan and Haley was just in its early stage. I think she's not Haley's boyfriend yet, just her love interest," Ariel interjected, also engrossed in the scripts. I think you're right about that," Sarah nodded, feeling a bit shy inside. She had unintentionally spoken ahead of herself, finding Lucas quite attractive. Quickly changing the topic, she steered the conversation in a different direction. Meanwhile, Julie and Ty Burrell engaged in a serious discussion about their roles, wearing expressions of concentration. Being a part of all this made Lucas's excitement surge through his veins. While his fellow actors and actresses present might not have known, Lucas understood that Modern Family was a series destined for great success. It had been the source of laughter and lifted his mood in the comedy series genre. Now, as a relatively unknown actor, being part of this very same comedy series Modern Family gave Lucas mixed feelings about reality. Lucas observed the serious yet light-hearted conversations and discussions among the future famous actors and actresses in front of him. Noticing that Nolan Gould wasn't particularly familiar with the people present, except for Julie, who seemed to have struck a chord with the young actor, making him more comfortable and engaging in discussions about their roles. After a while, as Lucas and the others delved into discussions about their roles, the director and writers approached them. Lucas was then pleasantly surprised as Christopher Lloyd patted him on the back. Feeling a bit overwhelmed, unlike the audition days when Christopher judged him, being in such close proximity to the renowned actor left Lucas a bit starstruck. After all, the old guy was quite well known, having written the Modern Family series. "Young man, do you know why you were chosen for the role?" Christopher adjusted his glasses as he asked Lucas, capturing everyone's attention, while Stephen Levitin just shook his head with a chuckle. No. Lucas responded with cluelessness. No? Well, it's because the network thinks you're cheap, Christopher Lloyd joked, but then noticed everyone's silence. Julie furrowed her brows, while Ty Burrell couldn't help but think, oh. I don't think that's a good joke. At least not a good one for Lucas. Lucas, hearing the joke, knew it was a jest but felt a bit uncomfortable inside. Sensing the awkwardness, he faked a laugh, ha ha ha, cheap? Well, I'm not surprised. He said. Everyone was a bit surprised to see Lucas handling the joke about him so well. Simultaneously, they found his response quite amusing in this awkward situation, his movements, the forced laughter, and his subsequent words, creating a sitcom-like atmosphere in real life. Some crew members who inadvertently heard Christopher's joke didn't find it funny, but upon hearing Lucas's response, they couldn't help but chuckle. Stephen Levitin and the other cast members also couldn't resist a light laugh. Christopher patted Lucas in the back and said, "Hey, kid, it seems you're really suitable for the role. You see, this TV series is a comedy, and I find your response to my joke quite amusing. You have a good sense of humor." Chapter 10, Disregard. After the awkward moment between Lucas and Christopher, the director and the two writers then discussed with the casts of Modern Family of their characters. And that, of course, included Lucas. The casts can suggest their opinion about the character, though, but the writers actually wrote the character of Phil Dunphy according to Ty Burrell himself. As a result, Ty Burrell doesn't have to act complicatedly, since the character is basically written for him. When Ty Burrell heard that from the writers, respectfully, Stephen Levitin and Christopher Lloyd, two people that are quite influential in Hollywood, Ty Burrell felt honored. To be honest, Ty Burrell was quite grateful towards Stephen Levitin and Christopher Lloyd. If not for them, he would not even be casted. Ty Burrell still remembered that the ABC network wasn't really leaning towards him previously. However, Stephen Levitin and Christopher Lloyd convinced the ABC network, and to convince them, Stephen Levitin and Christopher Lloyd set up mocking scenes of Ty Burrell and Sarah Hyland, the father and daughter scene. Only then did the ABC network trust the vision of the two writers. While Ty Burrell seriously yet lightly discussed his role with the two writers, Lucas has been quietly observing. From what Lucas heard during the discussions of the Modern Family characters, the writers admired Ty Burrell's determination and were inspired by his energetic and optimistic personality. As a result, they rewrote the character of Phil Dunphy to be just like Ty Burrell. The writers were really impressed by Ty Burrell, and hearing that Ty Burrell, initially considered for a different role, captivated the show's creators with his comedic timing and improvisational skills during the audition process. This led them to see his potential beyond the original character they offered him. While the creators of Modern Family didn't specifically look for A-list actors and actresses, they aimed for a cohesive ensemble cast. The goal was to have actors and actresses who could naturally portray the quirks and dynamics of their characters within the family unit. Finding individuals who genuinely embodied the characters' personalities and had chemistry with each other was paramount. During the discussions, Lucas felt somewhat left out, to be honest. The writers primarily engaged with the main cast, including Ty Burrell, Julie Bowen, and the one young actor along with two young actresses. Considering Ty Burrell's pivotal role as Phil Dunphy, the writers sought his suggestions and ideas to further shape the character into a nuanced and relatable figure. The same approach extended to Julie Bowen's role as Claire Dunphy and the three young talents Ariel, Sarah, and Nolan. While Lucas was seldom to say his opinion, it appeared that the two writers didn't regard his role as highly as the main roles. Even when Lucas tried to join the discussion by offering ideas from his perspective of Modern Family in his previous life, his suggestions were welcomed, but he still felt more like an outsider or a spectator. This feeling arose because his role wasn't as central as the main roles. While Lucas didn't particularly feel good about it, he swallowed his discontent. After all, he was in a supporting role and didn't require as much in-depth attention compared to the main characters. Additionally, Lucas didn't have much say in the production, and it seemed like the director and writers were treating him merely as an extra. This experience wasn't unfamiliar to Lucas, he had encountered similar feelings in his previous life. As a small-time actor on set, he often felt overlooked, with the crew, directors, or writers treating him indifferently. In those situations, he would be given orders as if he were in a military setting, and his opinions were deemed irrelevant. Even in his previous life under an agency, with a manager and agent, the treatment from the production made him feel as though he were not truly acknowledged as an actor. And right now in this life, Lucas didn't even have an agency yet, no agent, and no manager. He was basically just like an extra at this time. The treatment he received as a small-time actor in his previous life was much worse compared to now, that's why Lucas didn't react negatively too much about the director and writers basically ignoring him most of the time in the discussions. And to be asked of his opinions or suggestions once in a while made Lucas feel a bit better, and at the same time, he wasn't too surprised by the treatment towards him anyway. As the network behind Modern Family just gave Lucas a contract limited to the pilot episode. Which means, that even if the Modern Family became quite successful, it was unsure whether he'll receive a full-time contract, since the character may not appear in future episodes since the extent of his role, the character Marshall Dillon hasn't been fully mapped out yet, and the network or the production was still thinking whether Marshall Dillon will be as much relevant as the character was written, as the character was quite relevant in Haley's storyline, but that still depends on the audience response to the character of Marshall Dillon, and that's why the production writers held their regard on the supporting character, as everything hasn't been quite finalized yet. But Lucas was quite sure that Marshall Dillon would be well received as a character in the successful pilot of Modern Family, though ABC, the network behind Modern Family, and the production obviously weren't aware of that. What Lucas didn't know was that, as the writers or creators of Modern Family had actually been rejected by other networks, they tended to be careful yet creative in their work. They were doing their best as they had been accepted by ABC, aiming to stay on the channel. Stephen Levitan and Christopher Lloyd had already modified the scripts several times to ensure the show's best outcome. For instance, the initial focus of the TV series Modern Family was the crew of the mockumentary living in Jay's family. The fictitious filmmaker would gradually document his family, but the two writers felt the plot was off, so they revised it. Meanwhile, Lucas mostly observed the discussions of the director, writers, and main cast members. Nolan, surprisingly, provided his own suggestions and ideas, and to Lucas's surprise, even the kids seemed to have more influence than him, as the two writers took the kids' suggestions seriously. Afterward, the crew prepared, and the discussions ended. It seemed like the filming was about to begin. Seeing this, Lucas also prepared himself. Chapter 11, Prepping for Filming. The crew prepared the filming. Lucas felt a bit overwhelmed, and then he reads the script once more while the casts were preparing. The production team was quite meticulous. For instance, the production team keeps track of even the smallest items, like the fruits on the table, coffee mugs, and so on, creating a sense of realism and lived-in spaces. The cinematographer and gaffers are adjusting the lighting and camera angles to achieve the desired visual aesthetics, often collaborating with the director to fine-tune the shot. The sound crew monitors audio levels, captures dialogue and ambience, and adjusts microphones to ensure clear and consistent sound recording. As Lucas was reading the script and occasionally glancing at the scene surrounding him, he felt his heart beating quickly, but he calmed himself and just continued reading the script. As he was reading, a woman with glasses approached him. "Hello? Are you Mr. Lucas?" The woman's soft voice sounded. Lucas, who was rereading the script, raised his head as he heard his name. Then, he saw a good-looking woman with glasses appear before him. Lucas just nodded and said, "Well, that's me. Anything you need my help with?" As soon as Lucas said that, the woman, who seemed to be in her 20s, appeared a bit surprised hearing that from Lucas. But then the woman just shook her head and said formally, "No, Mr. Lucas. I don't need help from you. In fact, I am your makeup artist for today. Nice to meet you." Oh, Lucas could only make that sound because he had completely forgotten that there's still the makeup artist to assist him. The woman just smiled at him, thinking, he is an inexperienced actor, all right. While giving Lucas a look. When Lucas saw the makeup artist's expression, he knew that the woman must think he was a clueless actor who didn't know the filming preparation. Lucas could only smile a little. Despite being a small-time actor in his previous life, he gained quite a bit of experience. He was just quite dumbstruck at this moment, and his mind was in a state where he had forgotten the basics. Makeup is quite helpful in filming after all, as the camera magnification tends to amplify everything, including imperfections like blemishes, uneven skin tone, and dark circles. Makeup helps create a more even and flawless appearance on camera. Different lighting setups can cast harsh shadows and emphasize wrinkles or flaws. Makeup helps balance out the lighting and create a more consistent, flattering look. Also, Makeup can subtly reflect a character's personality, age, social standing, or even emotional state. For example, light and natural makeup for a young student, while heavier, aged makeup might be used for an older character. Lucas followed the makeup artist into a room with a mirror, seats in front of it, and one seat occupied by the young actor Nolan facing the mirror with the makeup artist working on his face. The young actor turned his eyes to Lucas, who had just arrived, before returning to read the script while the makeup artist attended to Nolan. Lucas then took a seat, and the makeup artist prepared to work on his face. While the makeup was being applied, Lucas reflected on his previous life. He remembered his first acting experience. His initial role was actually just a tree in a theater production. Recalling the time he performed on the theater stage, during a practice, the director instructed him to go left. Being inexperienced at that time, with almost no acting background, Lucas thought the director wanted him to move to his left side. The director then shouted, "Not to your left. To stage left." It was at that moment that Lucas felt pretty confused, realizing that stage left refers to the left side of the stage from the perspective of the actors facing the audience. It's a directional term used in theater, performance spaces, and film production to designate positions and movement cues. After that, Lucas remembered learning about the 9 positions on the theater stage. It was a gradual introduction to the world of acting, at least in theater. The inexperienced Lucas continued his journey to become an actor, eventually getting a chance to play a small role in a TV series. Lucas seized the opportunity, but along the way, he made several mistakes. Difficulties with cues and timing, missing camera cues, rushing dialogue delivery, and failing to maintain pace with other actors disrupted the rhythm of the scene. Additionally, he struggled with a lack of awareness of camera presence, being overly conscious of the camera or forgetting to project his voice in specific directions during his natural performance. And then there's also Lucas under-rehearsing or insufficient script analysis, not fully internalizing lines, character traits, or motivations, which led to inconsistencies and a lack of depth in the portrayal. At that time, Lucas attempted excessive improvisation or deviating from the script. While some improvisation can be delightful, going off track without prior discussion with the director would disrupt the flow of the scene and create editing challenges. Another mistake from Lucas. In this life, while Lucas did have acting experience from his previous life's memories, it didn't guarantee he wouldn't make mistakes now. In his previous life, he was nothing but a small actor in the eyes of others. Although Lucas's experience as a small actor in his previous life helped him in auditions and ultimately landed him the role, he knew he still had room for improvement. While Lucas was deep in thought, the makeup artist, Erica, was finally done. It only took a few minutes as there wasn't much makeup needed on Lucas's naturally good-looking face. Even Erica, the makeup artist, admired Lucas's handsome face. Of course, she remained calm. After all, in Hollywood, working on good-looking faces is quite common, as many aspiring actors and actresses are pursuing careers in the industry. After the makeup artist finished, Lucas took a drink of water. Soon after, the crew called for Nolan. It seemed the kid's role was about to start, and the staff also reminded Lucas to prepare. Lucas nodded in acknowledgement and then walked out of the house. In the first scene, he would be ringing the doorbell in front of the door. During that, the scene inside the kitchen where Claire is calling the kids for breakfast began. However, as Phil also called the kids with a cracked voice, it made Julie laugh, breaking her out of character. Because of that, the scene needed to be repeated. The director and writers didn't really mind, finding Ty Burrell's cracked voice amusing, to be honest. Due to the repeat in filming, after changing clothes in the changing room, Lucas just waited for his time for a few minutes. The crew hadn't reminded him yet, indicating that the filming of the main cast in the house was still ongoing. Chapter 12, Characterization. Lucas already wore the clothes of Marshall Dillon in the changing room as he was preparing, and all he has to do now is to prepare for a moment to embody the character of Marshall Dillon and analyze the personality of Marshall Dillon. From what Lucas sees in the character of Marshall Dillon so far, although his character is just a supporting role, Marshall Dillon has depth. Dillon may appear laid back, but he is smart enough to compose a song in the episode The Incident. To be honest, after reading the script several times, Lucas is quite sure that if the original owner of this body were to read the script, the original owner would at least relate to the character of Marshall Dillon. Why? The character of Marshall Dillon was also kicked out by his mother several times. Although the original owner of Lucas's body was kicked out by his father due to the influence of his stepmother, and Dillon was kicked several times while the original owner of Lucas's body was only kicked once, there is still similarity in the situation. When Lucas realized that, he thinks from the original owner of his body's perspective. He thought that by taking the perspective of the original owner or the original soul of his current body, it would be much easier and more relatable for him to act the character of Marshall Dillon, and it might be natural for his body to act the character. What Lucas didn't expect was that it actually works. Although Lucas has to admit that he thought he would struggle with the characterization by taking the perspective of the original owner of his current body and thinking that it may not even work at all, he was quite surprised by the result. Lucas could feel that his body was actually effectively reacting by taking the perspective of the predecessor of his current body. He could feel the emotions overflowing. It seems like the emotions of the previous Lucas, the owner of his current body, were being released. The feeling of grief from the predecessor's body was vividly experienced by the current Lucas. This grief, Lucas thought in surprise, then memories of the predecessor's body flashed in Lucas's mind. The memory was of how the previous Lucas searched for jobs in New York. Then, no one was willing to take him in. After that, there was also the moment when the previous Lucas had a conflict with his father and the discord he had with his father before being kicked out of the house. Although the previous Lucas had no recollection of his own mother, he always had complex feelings when seeing other kids with a mother or scenes of parent-child bonding. Despite the mixed emotions, the current Lucas knew it was a negative one. Perhaps the grief and depression were evident feelings that the previous Lucas was experiencing. Following that sense of grief, the current Lucas then felt emptiness, the feeling of abandonment, as if there were no people in this world he could truly rely on, except himself. That's when the previous Lucas became independent and tried his best to mask his complicated feelings by numbing himself with the aspiration of achieving something in life. The previous Lucas didn't want to succumb to sorrow or perish because of his depression. Instead, he chose to live with it, opting to set goals for himself, aspiring to live independently, and aiming for success in life. The previous Lucas seemed determined to surpass his father, attending auditions in the hope of becoming an actor. His roommate, Paul, also an actor, accompanied him to auditions. The previous Lucas dreamt of becoming a successful actor, leaving behind his half-brother, who was also an actor. However, that aspiration was never realized due to the untimely demise of the precious Lucas. The complicated feelings of the previous Lucas overwhelmed the current Lucas. After experiencing all the emotions from the previous Lucas flooding into his body, he felt like he embodied the previous Lucas rather than Marshall Dillon. Sitting while grappling with the intense emotions of the previous Lucas, he tried to suppress them, aware that the crew might notice an overwhelmed expression. He massaged his forehead to calm himself, and gradually, the feelings and emotions of the previous Lucas calmed down before disappearing. Damn! I didn't expect to encounter such a weird moment, Lucas thought to himself, sighing in relief when he realized his turn to act was still not in place. Although taking the perspective of the predecessor didn't fully embody the character of Marshall Dillon, it enlightened me quite a bit. It will surely help me embody Marshall Dillon more effectively and accurately, Lucas thought as he gulped water from the bottle provided by the production. Despite the fact that the previous Lucas, the original owner of his current body, faced more harsh treatment in life compared to Marshall Dillon, it also provided valuable insights for the current Lucas. At least now, Lucas has a better understanding of the character Marshall Dillon, or, to be more accurate, Lucas has gained more insight into the experiences of people who feel abandonment, the sensation of having no one to rely on. Honestly, Lucas can also relate to this feeling. In his previous life as a struggling actor, he faced discrimination from fellow actors and actresses, who sometimes treated him like an errand boy. Interestingly, some assistants of successful actors would even order him around, asking for coffee, with the promise that if Lucas complied, they might introduce him to the successful actor. The hope was that the successful actor would then recommend him to other directors, potentially securing a project for Lucas. Despite having no connections, Lucas chose to gamble and believe these assistants every time. Hence, the feelings of loneliness and a lack of care were not unfamiliar to Lucas. Now given a chance in life and the opportunity to act in one of the most successful TV series, Modern Family, Lucas is committed to portraying his role as Marshall Dillon to the best of his ability. Despite the role being a supporting one and seemingly uncomplicated, he aims to bring his interpretation and perspective to the character in line with both his own understanding and the vision of the writers. In this process, Lucas internalizes his role, and soon, his eyes take on a touch of laziness. This is in line with the writers' discussions, which emphasized that Marshall Dillon should appear lazy. The writers mentioned a character backstory, leaving Lucas to decipher it on his own. Based on his interpretation, derived from the script and his knowledge of watching Modern Family in his previous life. Dylan's lazy demeanor hides the untold story of a broken family. This background shapes his character, steering him towards the dream of becoming a singer and composing songs to make it big in the music industry, particularly evident in the early seasons, though the character's goals eventually change in the later seasons. Gradually embodying Marshall Dillon with laid-back movements and eyes conveying indifference, Lucas infuses a sense of rebellion into his actions. Contrasted with his initial performance as Marshall Dillon, there's now a noticeable edge, and observers might easily mistake him for a rock star. Chapter 13, Action. After Lucas' characterization of his role, when Lucas looked in the small mirror from the table, he felt his characterization of Marshall Dillon was similar to the character Roderick Heffley from the Diaries of a Wimpy Kid. Despite the rebellious sense he felt from his own movements, it was relatively toned down quite a bit. Although the showcase of the bad boy archetype can be fun, it can also be quite one-dimensional. So, Lucas only added the sense of rebellion or the bad boy feeling, but it was actually just to mask the true Dylan, the character that thirsts for friendship or a happy family. His family was a broken family, to the point that he was kicked out of the house by his own mother just because of her boyfriend. So, Lucas exhibited awkward movements, although he concealed them with a bad boy persona. It wasn't mere pretense, Dylan genuinely had reasons to be rebellious. Being well acquainted with portraying a bad boy from his past roles, Lucas drew inspiration from films like The Godfather, Scarface, and Once Upon a Time in America. In his previous life, Lucas often took on the role of a villain, and while he didn't reach the level of top actors with sophisticated methods, his portrayal of a bad guy was commendable. It was more simplified and closer to a real-life thug or gangster. Lucas embraced simplicity in acting after watching Once Upon a Time in America. Unlike films like The Godfather, where bad guys were romanticized, Once Upon a Time in America depicted them more realistically straight-up evil without the complex moral code of characters like Vito Corleone. As Lucas contemplated and characterized Marshall Dillon, the crew interrupted, urging him to prepare as his scene was about to begin. Lucas nodded, assuming the role of Marshall Dillon after exhaling his nervousness. "I hope the director and writers will appreciate my interpretation of Dylan's character," Lucas thought as he closed his eyes. The crew prepared, the director called for action, and the camera was set as Lucas rang the doorbell. In character as Dylan, Lucas discreetly glanced through the transparent glass near the door, spotting Julie, or Claire, approaching. Julie, in the role of Claire, projected a maternal aura, ready to protect her child at any moment. Lucas noticed Sarah, playing Haley, hastily descending the stairs, but Claire outpaced her. Claire, holding a fabric that cleverly concealed her stomach, opened the door and greeted Marshall Dillon. She seemed visibly surprised by Lucas' portrayal, immediately sensing he brought bad news. From Claire's perspective, it was evident that Haley needed to steer clear of this man, but expressing it directly wasn't an option. That's what Phil was there for. Claire put on a facade of niceness, shaking Dylan's hand and greeting him. "Hello, you must be Dylan." Dylan nodded and casually replied, "Yup, that's me. Dylan." His tone was lazy, yet respectful. His eyes carried a hint of intimidation, but his relaxed brows naturally dispelled any sense of threat from the seemingly bad-looking guy. Lucas's portrayal differed from the audition, catching the attention of director Jason and the writers. They chose to continue filming, eager to see if Lucas could elevate his character beyond the audition. Claire introduced herself while shaking Dylan's hand, stating, "I'm Haley's mother." As Haley, who was behind Claire, grabbed Dylan's forearm, she urged, "Hey, come on, let's go," leading him upstairs. Claire attempted to halt Dylan and Haley, engaging Dylan in conversation and posing some questions. Haley, visibly embarrassed as the one who invited Dylan, felt the awkwardness keenly. While Claire appeared to be discreetly checking Dylan's background, Phil entered the scene and approached Dylan. There was a momentary pause as Phil glanced at Dylan, who exuded a laid-back demeanor yet emanated a bad guy vibe. Sensing this, Phil tried to appear more intimidating to Dylan, but his attempt at intimidation only made him seem ridiculous and amusing. He awkwardly stated, "Let me meet this playa." Even Claire, standing near Phil, struggled to stifle her laughter, realizing she couldn't afford to break the scene. The camera then focused on Phil facing Dylan, while Haley looked utterly embarrassed. She seemed like her parents had embarrassed her significantly, especially in front of her crush. Despite Dylan's seemingly respectful response to Phil, the atmosphere was tense. Phil stared at Dylan and outwardly expressed positive sentiments, but his eyes told a different story, signaling to everyone in the room that Phil wasn't truly comfortable with Dylan. Haley found herself even more embarrassed, especially as she could clearly interpret Phil's disapproval of Dylan. Phil walked past Dylan on the stairs, staring at him and remarking, "You two keep it real, you know what I mean, son." Dylan, perplexed, looked at Phil and replied, Not really." His voice carried an awkward tone, and his eyes, genuinely confused, didn't hide Dylan's bewilderment. Despite the awkwardness, the scene turned out to be unexpectedly humorous. Even Sarah Hyland and Julie Bowen, who maintained serious expressions, struggled to contain their laughter, participating in an unintended try not to laugh challenge. They couldn't afford to ruin the scene, but the comedic tension was undeniable. Ty Burrell, although not initially inclined to laugh, couldn't help but feel a chuckle building up when he witnessed Dylan's genuine confusion. Lucas's performance was unexpectedly diverting, considering Lucas' performance right now wasn't in the topic of discussion among the crew. Despite his composed exterior, Ty Burrell, being an experienced actor, understood the humorous side of filming on set, especially when unexpected moments occurred. Both Sarah and Julie maintained their professionalism, and Lucas's performance, although amusing, didn't push them to uncontrollable laughter. Ty Burrell, momentarily sidetracked by Lucas's unanticipated response as Dylan, quickly refocused on portraying Phil, recalling the script. As Phil attempted to exert intimidation on Dylan, he inadvertently strained his back while leaning on the stairs balustrade, relying too heavily on it. Phil's sudden painful posture surprised Haley and Claire, but Dylan, still perplexed by Phil's earlier question, instinctively caught Phil, preventing him from falling, in a princess carry. When the camera captured this unexpected scene, the director and writers found it surprisingly perfect. Phil, now in Dylan's grasp, gazed at him with incredulous eyes, a mix of astonishment and clear embarrassment evident on Ty Burrell's face. Claire and Haley observed Dylan instinctively holding Phil in the princess carry, their expressions shifting from concern to curiosity. They watched as Dylan carefully carried Phil up to the sofa, creating an unintentionally amusing yet oddly captivating moment for the scene. Chapter 14, Payment. The scene of Lucas playing Dylan and helping Phil, and carrying him over the sofa, was captured very well in the camera. Then, after Phil thanked Dylan, Dylan goes upstairs with Haley. After the scene was completed, director Jason exclaimed, "Nailed it." After director Jason exclaimed that, the crew knew the scene was over, and they wrap up. "Is this really your first performance as an actor?" Ty Burrell asked Lucas. He's clearly a bit impressed by Lucas's play there. Lucas smiled faintly and said, "Yeah. It's my first. Quite a bit nervous, though." When Ty Burrell heard that, he chuckled and said, "Doesn't look like it." "Yeah, Lucas, you don't seem to be nervous. In fact, you performed quite well. It only takes one take with you in the picture, even I couldn't do that. At least in my first performance as an actress," Julie, who just sat beside Ty Burrell, said to Lucas. Lucas smiled when he heard the praises, then he said modestly, "Thanks. But the reason it only takes one take was because the whole cast did well in the scene, not just me. Indeed, the reason for it to be taken only one shot was because of the whole cast performing impressively well. At the same time, it is because of Julie being able to restrain herself from laughing, and Ty Burrell and Sarah Hyland not forgetting the script that made it possible to be taken in one shot. It seems like the cast, especially the veteran Julie and Ty Burrell, really appreciated the performance of Lucas as Dylan. So, they also somehow did their best in their performance to keep up with the new actor. However, what they didn't know was that Lucas could be considered an experienced actor, having been a small-time actor in his previous life. Despite the term small-time often accompanying actor, experience is a valuable asset. In Lucas's past, he frequently performed in independent films, where superior acting skills were often required. Meanwhile, the director and writers were pleasantly surprised by Lucas's performance. Director Jason remarked to Stephen Levitan, that young man's performance just now was quite impressive. "We only took one take on the scene, very impressive." Christopher Lloyd nodded and added, "Even I didn't expect that kid to pull off such a performance." Stephen Levitan also chimed in, "Yeah, we only chose him because we felt the kid could naturally embody the character of Dylan, aligning with the kid's personality. We didn't anticipate him delivering such a performance." Indeed, the writers and creators, Christopher Lloyd and Stephen Levitan, initially assumed Lucas Knight would naturally portray the character Dylan, misunderstanding Lucas's audition performance as merely reflecting his natural personality. And, of course, Not only that, during the audition, Lucas seemed to already possess some knowledge of camera awareness. The writers felt that Lucas needed just a bit of learning, and then he could portray the character Dylan seamlessly. Considering this, the writers concluded that casting Lucas for the role would be much preferable to other talents demanding higher fees. Ultimately, the network agreed with Lucas Knight, especially after viewing the footage of his audition performance for the supporting character. Afterward, the production team reviewed the scene of Haley inviting a man into the house, Dylan. So far, crucial elements such as cinematography, lighting, and sound were very well executed, prompting the crew to prepare for the next scene. Since Lucas only has a few moments on screen in the pilot episode, the production will film the scenes with Dylan first. In the scene where Dylan was inside Haley's room, the two watching something on a laptop, and Claire eyeing them, Claire opened Haley's room door. The scene of Claire talking to Haley was shot, but there were a few mistakes by Julie or Sarah at times, such as forgetting lines, leading to production repeats. However, Lucas, as Dylan, didn't really have lines as he was just observing the mother and daughter arguing. Dylan wore an expression of amusement, seemingly enjoying the exchange between the girl and the woman. And obviously, Dylan watching with amusement wasn't part of the script, but the director continued, feeling that it actually added to the funny atmosphere, seeing someone amused by a cat fight. The same could be said for the writers. They didn't feel like Lucas deviating from his character without it in the script posed any problem, as long as it didn't overly disrupt and change the theme of the series. Especially with Lucas as Dylan not having many lines, except for the scene where he met the Dunphy family, Lucas felt like expressing himself through movements. After that, the scene of Phil and Luke shooting each other with a gun just outside the house, then the toy gun in Phil's hand seemed to be shooting on its own. Meanwhile, Haley called for her dad, Phil, because her mother, Claire, was embarrassing her in front of her crush. She called for Phil, and Dylan followed Haley out. But as they just stepped out, the toy gun in Phil's hand shot directly at Dylan's face. However, Lucas as Dylan being hit didn't look convincing enough, the shot repeated a few times. Before Lucas as Dylan finally took the hit in the face, his painful exclamation sounded quite funny, having a somewhat feminine tone, eliciting laughter from almost all the crew and casts. This resulted in multiple retakes, but this time, the director instructed Lucas to replicate the same painful shriek as before, and Lucas had no issue with it. Because of that, the scene underwent several retakes before the production team finally captured the right shot, featuring the humorous scene of Dylan being hit, accompanied by his shriek of pain. After that, all the scenes of Dylan for the pilot episode concluded. Lucas also awaited the payment schedule outlined in the contract. In the meantime, for 2 days, Lucas interacted with the casts of Modern Family. Even though the scenes for Dylan had concluded, and there was no need for Lucas to be present during the main cast scenes, he still stayed in touch with the cast as he waited for his payment. Lucas also grew closer to the child actor, Nolan Gould, and noticed that the kid was quite adept at playing the guitar. Lucas witnessed him playing a few times. Regarding Ariel Winter, she was closely guided by her mother, and Lucas observed the girl being taught about appearance-related matters. After a while, Lucas finally received his payment of $3,000. In the pilot episode, Lucas felt quite fortunate, considering that amount equaled a few weeks' worth of work in a restaurant. What mattered to Lucas wasn't just the payment but the potential it held for his entry into Hollywood. As for why Lucas didn't earn $13,000, as offered to his friend Paul, Lucas recently discovered that the offer was only available beyond the pilot episode of Modern Family, specifically, from episode 2 onward if the actor became a regular for the TV series. Additionally, Lucas learned that his friend Paul was offered a full contract, covering an entire season. In contrast, Lucas's contract only extended to the pilot. The reason for this was evident: he wasn't well known, unlike Paul, who had already appeared in a few shows. Chapter 15, Return. Lucas went to Los Angeles International Airport. He already booked a flight to return to New York and spent at least $250. In the airplane, Lucas sat at the passenger seat, covered his eyes with a sleep mask, and relaxed himself to sleep. Lucas was thinking about how to increase his money because he might not receive any projects for now. The Modern Family pilot would only get released around September, and until then, whether the pilot would become successful and be picked up for a full season was unknown. If the Modern Family pilot became a flop and couldn't be picked up for a full season, what would happen to those actors and actresses contracted for an entire season by the network? Well, they would be offered an alternative role by the network. Anyway, Lucas was thinking about how to take advantage of the opportunities in 2009 and how he might be able to increase his pocket. Lucas was considering Bitcoin, contemplating the idea of investing his money in Bitcoin and accumulating it. The idea wasn't bad, investing in Bitcoin, a cryptocurrency that would become huge in the future. Lucas would probably be guaranteed to be rich after a few years. However, if that were the case, Lucas wouldn't be able to reap the profits after a few years, and that's not what Lucas truly wanted. True, Lucas could just lay down and invest all his money and future earnings in Bitcoin. After a few years, he would probably be rich and wouldn't even need to work in his life anymore with the amount of money he might get from his investment in Bitcoin. However, that boring life was not something Lucas really wanted. Besides achieving financial success, Lucas aspired to be a successful actor. Perhaps that's because it was his true passion, and it could be what the previous owner of Lucas's current body desired as well, to become an actor and prove his family wrong, including his father, stepmom, and half-siblings. Returning to the topic, investing in Bitcoin wasn't a bad idea, but Lucas didn't want to rely entirely on it. He could explore other opportunities to achieve financial stability in this life. If Lucas received a potential project later and truly became an actor, he could either continue relying on the money paid by film studios or networks. However, that might not be enough for what Lucas truly desired. Regardless of Lucas's current plans, he still lacked the right amount of money, with only about $4,700 in his pocket. The additional $2,000 was borrowed from his manager just in case. While lost in thought, Lucas lifted his sleep mask, retrieved his iPod from his pocket, and plugged in an earphone. After turning on the iPod, he inserted the earphone and selected a music track, filling his ears with the sounds of music. As Lucas listened to the music, memories of his previous life surfaced. His favorites included music from the Lumineers, Oasis, Coldplay, Radiohead, Nirvana, and more. Those bands produce excellent songs, and Lucas considers some of their tracks among his favorites. When Lucas recalls these songs, he searches his iPod to see if they are saved there. The iPod was a gift from Stephen Levitin, a reward for Lucas's commendable performance. Despite his brief screen time, Lucas gave his best effort, hoping that even if he didn't secure another contract, other agencies might see potential in him. Lucas needs to be patient. While searching for songs or bands like Nirvana and Oasis, he couldn't find them, discovering mostly tracks from the Backstreet Boys. It seems Stephen Levitin isn't a fan of those bands or songs. Lucas concluded. Honestly, he wasn't sure if the iPod was Stephen Levitin's personal one or an unused device. Either way, Lucas plans to find those classic songs later. After the airplane lands at LaGuardia Airport, Lucas disembarks and exits the airport. He then calls for a taxi to return to his apartment. Upon returning to the building where Lucas's apartment was situated, he walked upstairs and through the hall until he reached his apartment door. Upon opening it, Lucas found his roommate, Paul, inside, tapping away on his iPhone. Paul noticed Lucas entering, nodded with a smile, and said, "Look who's here. What's up?" Lucas smiled faintly and walked over to Paul, replying, "I'm doing well. It seems like you got the role." Paul said with a slight smile. Lucas nodded, saying, "Yeah. Thanks for giving me this opportunity, though." "No big deal, bro," Paul replied, tapping Lucas on the shoulder. Lucas noticed the iPhone in Paul's hand, reminding him that iPhones seem to be a common thing in this world now too, right? Paul noticed Lucas eyeing his iPhone 3G and asked, "Interested in getting a phone like this, bro?" Lucas nodded and replied, "Yeah, I think I'll buy one later." "You should, bro. The flip phone you're using now is kinda old. With your money, you can easily get one," Paul suggested as he showed off his phone. Lucas nodded and then remembered, saying, "Oh, right. I remember borrowing some money from you. I was going to give it back." He took his wallet and retrieved $300. When Lucas handed the $300 to Paul, he shook his head, returning $100. "Dude, you only borrowed $200 from me. You don't need to give another $100. Lucas insisted, saying, "Accept it, brother. Consider it interest." After some back and forth, Paul finally accepted it, saying, "All right." Following that, Lucas and Paul engaged in a lengthy conversation. Eventually, Paul invited Lucas to meet the friends he had made as an actor. Chapter 16, Two Chris's. Lucas doesn't find any problem accepting the invitation from Paul, inviting him. After all, he doesn't have anything to do in the meantime. After that, Lucas washed himself in the bathroom. After finishing, he dressed himself formally. After Lucas finishes in the bathroom, it is then Paul's turn to use it. After a while, Lucas saw Paul was also already prepared. As they were walking out of the apartment building, Lucas talked to Paul for quite a while, and they boarded a taxi. After Paul told where to go, the taxi went off to the locations of the meeting place. And after boarding out of the taxi, Lucas was quite surprised that they actually came into a bar. Bar? Lucas said in curiosity. Then he saw Paul nodding. Yup, the Alphabet Lounge. We agreed to meet here to relax, Paul said with a smile. Lucas and Paul entered the bar, and Lucas saw the place looked kind of cozy. There were already people inside, but they were drinking or talking together while a beautiful woman sang a song. There was no loud music or TVs. Lucas saw that the bar focused on conversation and relaxation, with the background murmur of laughter and the clinking of glasses. Lucas followed Paul, and then they went to a certain table occupied by 3 people. It was 1 woman and 2 men. When Lucas looked over, he was quite surprised to see the 2 men among them, but he remained calm and just followed Paul to that table with 3 people. The 3 people noticed Paul approaching, and the woman waved her hand. It seemed like they were waiting for him. Paul smiled and waved back, making his way to their table. After Lucas and Paul reached the table, the 3 people greeted Paul. Then they noticed Lucas beside him. Paul, who is he? A brown-haired man who had just greeted Paul asked. The woman also looked curiously at Lucas beside Paul. Paul smiled, patted Lucas' shoulder, and said, "This is my friend, I'll introduce to you. He is Lucas Knight, an aspiring actor." "Oh? Your friend? Nice to meet you." The brown-haired man stood up and offered a handshake to Lucas, which he accepted. Lucas simply said, "Lucas Knight. Nice to meet you." After greeting the young woman, who seemed to be an actress, Lucas went on to greet the 2 men. "Nice to meet you, Lucas Knight. I'm Chris Hemsworth." The brown-haired man introduced himself with a smile. The man beside Chris Hemsworth also stood up, shook hands with Lucas, and introduced himself. "Hi, Lucas. I'm Chris Evans. Nice to meet you." Lucas chuckled and said as he shook hands with Chris Evans, "Another Chris." Then, Lucas and Paul took seats around the same table. After settling in, Lucas glanced at the 2 Chris's and remarked, "I can't tell you 2 apart." When Paul heard that, he couldn't help but chuckle. He didn't expect his friend to make a joke right after the first meeting with new people. The 2 Chris's looked at each other and smiled. Chris Hemsworth playfully teased Chris Evans, "How does it feel having a doppelganger?" Chris Evans smiled faintly in response to Chris Hemsworth's tease and countered, "Honestly, it's a bit of a relief. Now I finally understand who's been eating all my cereal." Ha ha ha. Lucas, Paul, and the woman named Rachel laughed at Chris Evans' response. Chris Hemsworth, the only one not laughing, responded a bit awkwardly, "I think I made a mistake. You're my doppelganger this whole time, you're the one who eats the cereal." Chris Hemsworth's awkward response, as if he's trying hard to make a comeback, only made the banter between the 2 Chris's funnier. After that, the brown-haired woman looked at Lucas and asked, "So, you're an actor?" When that was asked, the 2 Chris's turned their attention to Lucas, while Paul remained silent, sipping his beer. "I aspire to be. For now, I am still a beginner," Lucas responded calmly. "Well, you look kind of young. How old are you, mate?" Chris Hemsworth asked Lucas. "I'm 19 years old this year," Lucas responded. 19? You're indeed young. Compared to Paul, he's already 24 years old, Chris Evans said as he glanced at Lucas. When Paul heard that, he immediately retorted, "Hey, I'm not that old. You say it as if I'm already ancient. 24 is still young." "I never said you are," Chris Evans innocently remarked. "You have the guts to tease my age when you're already 27 and about to turn 28 this year," Paul said with a chuckle. "Young man, I may be 28, but I look younger than you," Chris Evans insisted. Lucas looked at the 2 bantering as he sipped his beer. While chatting with Chris Hemsworth and Rachel, the bar introduced another singer who requested to perform on stage. Lucas observed the singer, a beautiful young woman, seemingly in her teens, probably 17 or 18. She sang, and her heavenly voice resonated with the guitar notes played by her hands. She wore jeans and an ordinary t-shirt. The bar became even more serene with the ballad song performed by the young woman. As Lucas listened to the song, memories of his favorite tunes from his past life flooded in. He contemplated searching for those nostalgic 90s or 2000s songs. However, with Paul's invitation tonight, he lacked the opportunity. His phone lacked internet access, and the apartment he was in lacked a computer for effective online searches. Observing that patrons could request songs, Lucas jotted down a song title on the table's paper in case someone wanted to make a request. He handed it to the nearby bartender. Paul then inquired, "Are you requesting a song?" Lucas nodded and replied, "Yeah." After a while, local artists, including the young woman, continued to grace the small stage one after another. In each performance, they read requested songs from the written papers, and various local artists or musicians showcased their talents, aligning with the categories of songs suitable for their styles. The paper with Lucas's requested song was then read aloud by the beautiful young woman who had just performed an alternative rock and ballad simultaneously, Wonderwall by Oasis. A Britpop, alternative rock and ballad song. As the young woman read the requested song, she realized she didn't know such a song, and a confused expression crossed her face. Despite the confusion, being an alternative rock and ballad piece, she was the one slated to perform it. Lucas smiled, amused by the beauty's perplexed expression. It was, after all, the song he had requested. The intriguing aspect of song requests in this bar unfolded: they can request songs in varying musical genres, even if the original wasn't in that style. Once the name of the song and its original artist or band were written down, the local artists on stage were expected to be familiar with the song and perform it in the requested musical style, whether it be ballad, alternative rock, or country. However, Lucas could see that the young woman didn't know the song, and almost everyone in the crowd shared in her confusion. "Does someone know this song, Wonderwall?" The young woman queried the audience through the microphone, but the crowd remained silent as they too were unfamiliar with it. In response, the young woman requested, "Whoever requested this song, can you raise your hand?" The crowd exchanged glances, finding the situation quite intriguing. It wasn't unheard of for someone to request a non-existent song, and if the requester didn't step forward, the local artists could choose to overlook the request. Lucas raised his hand, drawing the attention of the young woman on stage. The crowd looked a bit surprised at Lucas. Meanwhile, Lucas sensed something amiss. The song he had requested should have been known by at least one or two in the crowd, but not a single person spoke up. Chapter 17, Wonderwall I. After seeing Lucas raise his hand, the young woman on the stage asked, "Are you the one who requested the song?" Meanwhile, on the table where Lucas sat, Paul, the two Chris's, and Rachel looked at Lucas with a bit of curiosity, as they also didn't know the song that Lucas had requested. Lucas nodded and said, "Yes, I'm the one who requested it. The song is named Wonderwall, made by the famous 90s British band named Oasis." When the crowd heard Lucas' words, almost all of them had mixed reactions, but most of them wore a confused expression, while thinking, "Wonderwall? Oasis? Famous British band in the 90s. And some people murmured among themselves. They asked their friends beside them, "Wonderwall? Have you heard of this song before?" "No." "What about that band, what was it called?" "Oasis? Have you heard of that band before?" "I don't think so. That guy said it was a famous band in the 90s, and it's a British band." "I know most famous bands in the 90s, but that Oasis name didn't ring any bells." "Me too. I think that guy must be high or something. A pity. He looks so young, though. Sigh. Many young people have been into drugs lately. God, heal this country." Many people assumed Lucas was under the influence of drugs due to his unfamiliar words. Meanwhile, the young woman on the stage, upon hearing Lucas' words, simply responded, "Oasis." She paused, trying to recall something from her mind, but after a few seconds of deep thought, she couldn't remember any band named Oasis, let alone a song titled Wonderwall. She continued to look at Lucas and said, "Gentlemen, I don't recall any such band, and the song you requested doesn't ring a bell in my memory." Lucas, hearing the young woman's response, felt something was truly amiss. How could such a well-known British band from the 90s be unheard of in this place? Really? Has no one here heard of the song or band I just mentioned? Lucas scanned the crowd and asked. He also looked at Paul and the others, but they shook their heads in confusion. The crowd didn't really respond to Lucas, just a mixed murmur echoing through the space. The young woman, noticing this, observed the patron's mixed opinions about Lucas. She then said, "It seems almost everyone is unfamiliar with what was requested by what's your name, sir?" "Lucas." "Right, Mr. Lucas, the song you've requested is unfamiliar to everyone here. You can either request another song, or..." The young woman paused, considering something interesting. Suspecting that Lucas might be under the influence of drugs or playing a prank to communicate with her, she brewed up a plan and said with a faint chuckle, "Or Mr. Lucas can perform the song for us, enlightening us about it." Lucas was a bit surprised when he heard that latter option from the young woman. Initially uninterested, he noticed the patrons in the bar encouraging him to perform. Lucas pondered for a moment, recalling that he requested the song out of a desire to hear his favorite tune once more. However, faced with the reality that neither the local artists nor the patrons were familiar with Wonderwall by Oasis, it seemed he wouldn't get to hear his favorite song. Unless, he performed it himself, right? Reflecting on his past life, Lucas remembered occasionally performing his favorite songs without any issues. There didn't seem to be a problem in doing the same in this life. Me? Performing the song? Well, if it's okay with everyone here, I can give it a shot for a short time," Lucas said, a bit hesitant. In response, the patrons started shouting at him, "Go on, mate. Sing the song for us. Maybe we'll remember that song. Yeah, we don't mind. As long as your voice isn't horrendous, it's okay. Go." Encouraged by the crowd, Lucas also turned to the young woman on the stage, and she gestured for him to come. Lucas stood up, then heard Paul saying, "Dude, does the song you're about to perform even exist?" Lucas chuckled, "You'll know after you hear it." He thought the people might have heard the song but didn't know the title or the band that composed it, so Lucas decided to perform it for everyone today. After Paul heard his friend's words, he simply watched as Lucas went on the stage where the young woman was. After stepping onto the stage, Lucas felt the gazes of the bar's crowd. His friend Paul, the two Chris's, and Rachel were looking at him expectantly. Turning to the young woman holding a guitar, Lucas noticed up close that she was even more beautiful. Brushing away distractions in his mind, he asked, "Can I borrow the guitar?" The woman nodded and said, "Of course," handing the guitar to Lucas. As Lucas held the guitar, memories from his previous life seemed to flash at that moment, causing him to freeze for a few seconds. Before the crowd could complain, Lucas moved and took a seat situated on the stage. He strummed the guitar randomly as a test, feeling that his fingers, or rather the fingers of his current body, were not accustomed to it. He even experienced a bit of pain from strumming the guitar strings. As Lucas continued his random strumming, the guitar produced chaotic and dissonant sounds, prompting frowns and hushed discussions among the patrons. Is this guy for real? Does he really know how to play the guitar? Is he just fooling around? Wasn't that already expected? He's fooling around with a made-up song request. Paul and the others heard the discussions around them, feeling a bit worried for Lucas. Chris Hemsworth turned to Paul and asked, "Are you sure your friend will be okay?" "I don't know." Paul turned to Chris Hemsworth and just shrugged. To be honest, Paul wasn't that familiar with Chris Hemsworth. Hemsworth was a friend of Chris Evans, invited by Evans, and Paul became friends with Evans and Rachel during the filming of Push. Shaking his head, Paul looked at his friend on the stage, still randomly strumming the guitar. Meanwhile, the young woman who had lent her guitar to Lucas furrowed her brows as she observed him, thinking, "Is this guy really high on substances?" Lucas tested the guitar for a minute before stopping. After calming down, especially his fingers, he looked towards the crowd, and memories from his previous life uncontrollably flashed back. The memory of when he worked as a singer in a local bar flashed in Lucas's mind. He recalled singing his favorite song while people carried on with their discussions and conversations, largely ignoring him on the stage. Now, gazing at the crowd before him, Lucas reminisced about his past life. The emotions and feelings of the realization of this new reality were only now sinking in for him. The helpless feeling of his soul not being able to return to his previous life's body, with its abundance of memories, and those calloused hands accustomed to playing the guitar unlike the unfamiliar ones in his current body. The discomfort of occupying a form that wasn't originally his. While Lucas wasn't excessively complaining about his current reality, recognizing its potential with the knowledge from his previous life, the complex and mixed feelings lingered. He still found himself missing the happy and sad moments of his previous life. After deep contemplation for several seconds, Lucas sighed. Finally, he was ready to perform, seeking to appease the impatient crowd. As Lucas started the performance, he strummed the opening chords, his fingers dancing over the frets with practiced ease. His voice, rough and raw like whiskey on gravel, intertwined with the music, illustrating a tale of heartache and hope. Today is gonna be the day that they're gonna throw it back to you. Chapter 18, Wonderwall 2. Lucas strumming the guitar, opening notes, the patrons listened, over in shock, as the music flowed to their ears. Today is gonna be the day that they're gonna throw it back to you. The moment the guitar's opening notes and Lucas dropping the verse, the crowd went silent. They didn't expect Lucas to be actually singing, and the opening was not too bad. In the meantime, the crowd felt a different feeling with the first verse alone, each word hanging heavy in the air, a mark etched in time. Was it hope? Regret? A plea for redemption lost in the echo of past mistakes? The young woman named Samantha, also a music performer, looked at Lucas with interest as he strummed the guitar and performed. In the midst of Lucas' performance, memories from his previous life resurfaced, like fragments of a dream trying to reclaim their place. Complicated feelings surged within him, merging with bittersweet nostalgia of a reality just beyond reach. Lucas was quite engrossed in his performance. The feelings, emotions of his precious life, were released at this moment. And by now, you should have somehow realized what you gotta do, he sang, his eyes searching the darkened corners of the room, as if looking for an answer, a reflection of his own lost melody. The music swelled, the chorus erupting like a dam breaking beneath the weight of unshed tears. I don't believe that anybody feels the way I do about you now, he roared, thick with an emotion he didn't understand. The faces staring back at him were blank slates, strangers drawn by the pull of an alien tune. They saw a handsome stranger with a haunting song, but Lucas saw ghosts flickering in the corner of his vision, the ghosts of loved ones, of joys and sorrows etched in a forgotten language. The patrons, initially doubtful, couldn't help but be drawn into the raw authenticity of Lucas' performance. And backbeat, the word is on the street that the fire in your heart is out. I'm sure you heard it all before, but you never really had a doubt. Meanwhile, the crowd was engrossed, each person having their interpretation of the verses Lucas sang. Most believed the lyrics lamented a one-sided love, while some sensed a deeper undercurrent of frustration with societal expectations. Was he singing about an unrequited crush, or the burden of conforming to an unlived life? I don't feel that anybody feels the way I do about you now, Lucas sang shortly after the verse, his tone sharp, tinged with bitterness and a hint of accusation. As most patrons gradually became engrossed and captivated by the song, they felt the sting of rejection, the despair of someone whose love went unnoticed. Samantha, also captivated, listened to the song while observing Lucas on stage. She pondered, does such a song really exist? If so, how could such a song go unnoticed by me? The musical tone and lyrics were undeniably beautiful. Other local artists in the bar also listened to Lucas, some of them were pondering similar thoughts as Samantha, recognizing the potential in the young man performing on stage. Meanwhile, Paul and the others gazed at Lucas with a hint of complexity, especially Paul. He hadn't expected his friend to sing, let alone perform an unfamiliar yet beautiful song. The melody soared, a flicker of hope battling the shadows. Lucas's voice climbed a hopeful octave as he crooned, and all the roads we have to walk are winding. His voice seemed to gain strength. The crowd felt the echoes of their own struggles, the uncertainty of choices made and paths untaken. For Lucas, it was a declaration of resilience, a promise to survive in his current unfamiliar reality. Shortly after the previous verse, Lucas sang with a slightly increased tempo, a flicker of defiance igniting in his eyes. All the lights that lead us there are blinding, he snarled, his voice a weapon against the unknown forces holding him back. Most of the crowd sensed the simmering anger beneath the surface, interpreting it as a rebellion against societal pressures or the constraints of his own insecurity. The chorus became a plea, a desperate hand reaching out for salvation. There are many things that I would like to say to you, but I don't know how. Because maybe you're gonna be the one that saves me. And after all, you're my Wonderwall. He sang, his voice cracking with vulnerability. The crowd's hearts ached with him, seeing in his words the struggle to express unspoken emotions, the fear of rejection holding him hostage. However, a few discerning ears caught the subtle shift in tone. The maybe wasn't just a lack of confidence, it was a sliver of hope, a glimmer of possibility. Maybe, just maybe, salvation could come in the form of this unknown, this you that held the power to mend his broken world. Many women in the crowd, who misunderstood Lucas singing the song, felt they could be that person to mend his broken world. Paul, listening to his friend's performance, looked at Lucas with a hint of complexity, wondering, "Who hurt you, man?" He believed his friend must have experienced heartbreak with a woman in the past. Samantha observed Lucas deeply. Not in love, but as Lucas performed the song, she found herself developing admiration for him. Simultaneously, listening to the song, she became almost certain that such a song never existed. Samantha sensed that Lucas was singing his originally composed song, inspired by the heartbreak he experienced. As a young woman, she thought whoever rejected Lucas must be blind. Given Lucas's charm now, many women would be lining up just to be with him. The crowd absorbed the verse, echoing with bitter resignation. "Today was gonna be the day, but they'll never throw it back to you," he crooned, his voice tinged with a weary acceptance of fate. The audience sensed the sting of betrayal, the feeling of being overlooked or dismissed in his words. Yet, the undercurrent of defiance persisted. "And by now, you should have somehow realized what you're not to do," he sang, a spark of defiance flickering in his eyes. This wasn't just about lost love, it was about reclaiming control, refusing to be a passive victim in his own story. The bridge became a kaleidoscope of emotions. The winding roads and blinding lights could be seen as the labyrinth of his confusion, the overwhelming choices and uncertainties threatening to consume him. The crowd attentively listened as the song unfolded, the lyrics flowing smoothly yet beautifully. "I don't believe that anybody feels the way I do about you now. And all the roads that lead you there were winding." As the engrossed crowd immersed themselves in the flowing lyrics of the song, it finally reached the concluding chorus, a cathartic release, a torrent of raw emotion washing over the room. "You're gonna be the one that saves me. And after all, you're my wonderwall," I said. "Maybe," he roared, his voice hoarse from the struggle but laced with newfound determination. "You're gonna be the one that saves me." In that moment, the song's meaning transcended the confines of a one-sided love story. It became a universal anthem of hope, a declaration of faith in the power of human connection to heal and redeem. The audience erupted in applause, their own emotions stirred by the singer's journey. As the final notes faded, Lucas stood on the stage, bathed in applause, a lone figure but no longer lost. He had found his voice, his story, and perhaps, just maybe, he had truly found his way in this life. The song, Wonderwall, wasn't just a lament, it was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a reminder that even in the darkest nights, a single melody can light the path toward redemption. Song, Wonderwall by Oasis. Chapter 19, Difference to his previous life's world. Samantha looked as Lucas stood up on the stage, he was bathed in applause from the crowd. Then she saw that Lucas was approaching her. "Here's your guitar. Thank you for lending it to me for a short time," Lucas said gratefully to Samantha as he returned the guitar to her. "Not at all. I think your performance was great, so I don't mind if you want to use it for more," Samantha said as she took the guitar. Then she said, "The song you just performed. It's your original, isn't it?" When Lucas heard that, he shook his head and said with a confused expression, "No, it's not my original. I mean, don't you remember? That song was composed by the band Oasis." "You needn't deny it with such a reason, Mr. Lucas," Samantha interrupted Lucas, crossing her arms over her chest. She said to him, "Not your original? Composed by what? Oasis? Almost everyone here knows such a band didn't exist, let alone the fact that the song you just performed was good enough not to go unnoticed by the many music enthusiasts present." Lucas couldn't help but feel genuinely confused. He thought, doesn't everyone here know about the popular English band Oasis? Are they living under a rock, or does it really not exist, and the same goes for their songs? As Lucas pondered, he realized that he was technically in a different world, right? He had transmigrated into the body of Lucas Knight, whose father was a WB director, and had an older stepbrother making a name in Hollywood. Now that he thought about it, Lucas couldn't recall anyone like Melvin Knight, his current body's stepbrother, being famous in his previous world. Maybe Lucas in his previous life hadn't heard of such a person before, but what about his roommate and friend, Paul Sterling? The more Lucas thinks about it, he never heard of an actor famous enough to even be granted the opportunity to audition for Marshall Dillon of Modern Family, right? And now, Oasis band and their songs don't exist in this world? Well, Lucas thinks that they may really not exist in this world, as it seems this world isn't the same as his previous one. "Well, what do you think of my song?" Lucas said, knowing that it's not his song, and he couldn't help but feel kind of uncomfortable claiming such a song as his. Meanwhile, Samantha didn't mind Lucas stuttering slightly, she just said, "Your song is great. I felt that such a song should be known. Why don't you record your song and release it?" She looked at Lucas with a bit of a twinkle in her eyes as she thought about it. Lucas felt a bit overwhelmed seeing the young and beautiful Samantha looking hopefully at him. But he said, "I'll think about it." While Lucas and Samantha were talking, the patrons in the bar shouted, "Hey, will you perform once more? Just flirt later, please perform again, Lucas. Please perform more." Lucas couldn't help but turn to the crowd and exchange glances with Samantha. He smiled helplessly and said, "I'll only perform for a short time, so." Samantha smiled and said, "I understand. I apologize for our patrons." "It's okay," Lucas replied. Then he saw Samantha calming down the crowd, and he turned to Paul and the others in the distance. Paul was seemingly encouraging him with gestures, the same for the two Chris's. They probably think that he was hitting on Samantha, Lucas thought. Lucas then turned his attention to Samantha, ignoring his friend and the crowd shouting for more. He saw that Samantha was also looking at him, and feeling a bit shy, Lucas excused himself. Samantha wanted to stop Lucas but held back. She didn't have any reasons to stop him, so she just watched his back as he departed. "Oh, Samantha. You don't need to feel so complicated about a guy leaving." Samantha shook her head to shake away distracting thoughts. As Lucas walked toward his friend, he noticed people praising him along the way. "Great song there, buddy. Yeah. But a pity you're not a singer of this bar, or I'd make you sing at the stage all day." "Ha ha ha." Lucas just smiled and then returned to Paul and the others. "Hey, I didn't know you had such talent." Paul patted Lucas on the shoulder and praised. He then said, "You even have the guts to hit on that young woman there." "Haha." Lucas sighed and said, "I'm not hitting on anyone, Paul." "Sure." Paul whistled as he said. "That's such a beautiful song. I hope I could listen to more." Rachel exclaimed, genuinely impressed by the song. "Not gonna lie, but I also liked it," Chris Hemsworth said. "If I knew someone like you existed, I'd be more than happy to work with you instead of Paul," Chris Evans said, teasing Paul at the same time. "Hey, you're going too far," Paul chuckled as he nudged Chris Evans. Lucas noticed something in the words and said, "Oh? Are you currently working with Paul?" he asked, curious about the project Chris Evans and Paul were collaborating on. "Well, I'm working on a project named Loser, and Paul has a side character role in that film. We're actually about to start filming in about a week," Chris Evans explained. "Side character? Really?" Paul chimed in, "You might as well say I'm just an extra or something." Lucas observed Paul and Chris Evans in a playful bickering, but he couldn't help feeling kind of envious of Paul. His friend was already involved in a film project, while he didn't even have an agency yet. While Lucas was lost in thought, a woman in her 30s approached their table, drawing the attention of Paul and the others. They watched as the woman looked at Lucas. "Mr. Lucas, I saw your performance just now, and I must say, I can see the potential of a singer in you," the woman said with a faint smile. When Paul and the others realized the woman was here for Lucas, they turned their gaze toward him. "Thank you," Lucas replied. "I'm Elena Rhodes, the manager of this bar," the woman in her 30s introduced herself, extending a handshake to Lucas. Lucas gladly accepted Elena's handshake and introduced himself, "Lucas Knight." Elena nodded and greeted Paul and the others before turning her attention back to Lucas. "I am very impressed with your performance. Would you like to work as a singer at this bar?" Lucas and the others were a bit surprised that the bar manager was offering Lucas a job, but he politely declined, saying, "I apologize, but I must decline. I already have a job, and I am pursuing my own goals." "Oh? It's all right. You don't have to apologize. If your thoughts change, this is my contact card," Elena said, handing Lucas a card. She added, "I really loved the song you just sang on stage. If you're interested in having your song recorded, just contact me. I know someone at a professional recording studio." After saying that, Elena didn't continue to disturb Lucas and the others and walked away. After Elena walked away, Paul and the others looked at Lucas more admirably and teased him. As time passed, a few attractive and fit women approached Lucas. Paul and the others watched as Lucas politely declined the women who were essentially throwing themselves at him. Watching Lucas decline seemed painful in the eyes of Paul, Chris, and Chris. Afterward, Lucas, Paul, along with the two Chris's and Rachel, walked out of the bar. Lucas and Paul bid farewell to the two Chris's and Rachel, then hailed a taxi to return to their apartment. In the taxi, Lucas talked with Paul and learned that Paul would be quite busy and might not even return to the apartment for a few weeks or even months. He was working on a film project with Chris Evans on a film called Loser, and Paul was part of the main cast. Lucas knew that movie, and its rating or box office results didn't go that well compared to Chris Evans' Captain America. However, what Lucas noticed was that Paul was actually included in the movie Loser. Lucas knew there was no one named Paul Sterling as part of the main cast at all. Chapter 20, Desire. Early in the morning in New York, Lucas woke up as usual. He noticed Paul was still sleeping, so Lucas brushed his teeth and took a shower before wearing some clothes. His breakfast was instant ramen, as usual. After eating, Lucas went to work around 8 a.m. He headed to the restaurant, and as soon as he entered, he saw manager Liza. The moment she saw him, she exclaimed, "Lucas? You're here." "Yeah, how's it been going, Ma Liza?" Lucas said. He was about to say manager, but he remembered that Liza herself said he could call her just Liza. "We're doing fine. Anyway, how's your acting career faring?" Liza didn't mind Lucas almost calling her manager formally and just curiously asked about his career. "Haha, I think I did well, to be honest." Lucas smiled as he remembered acting alongside the Modern Family cast. "Good, good. When does your show air?" Liza asked curiously once more. Lucas smiled wryly when he heard your show, even though it wasn't solely his. He then said, "I think it's around September, from what I remember." As Lucas and Liza were talking, Leonard walked by, noticed Lucas, and approached him. "Lucas, my man. You're already here." "Yeah, I returned yesterday, around afternoon," Lucas greeted Leonard with a nod. "I have high hopes for you, man." Leonard patted Lucas several times before heading to the changing room. Lucas nodded to Liza and was about to walk to the changing room but then remembered something. He said to Liza, "Oh, right. Liza, here's your $2,000. I didn't really spend your money that much there, the production has already covered the accommodations and all." Lucas was about to take the $2,000 from his wallet, but Liza stopped his actions. "No need to pay me now, Lucas." Liza patted Lucas on the shoulder and said with a warm smile, "You can pay me back when you're famous." "Are you serious?" When Lucas heard that, he looked at Liza in surprise. "Is she really so confident in me that I'll become famous?" Lucas thought. Although he was a transmigrator, he wasn't overconfident to the point of being certain he'd become really famous in the future. "Of course, I'm serious," Liza said. Then she added, "I'm not really in a hurry to take the money back, anyway." Lucas felt touched, not only because Liza was willing to lend him money without being in a hurry to take it back, but also because of the trust Liza had placed in him. "Thank you, Liza," Lucas said with a smile and then went to the changing room. Liza looked at the back of Lucas and, with a smile, thought, "I hope that you really reach the dream you are reaching for." Liza remembered her younger brother in Lucas, who died of cancer at the age of 13. She was just 14 at that time and was very close to her brother. Liza recalled that her younger brother wanted to become a star in Hollywood. Liza teared up a bit, wiped the tears from her eyes, and then resumed her duties. Lucas and Leonard donned their waiter attire and went to work. The restaurant buzzed with activity around noon, customers streaming into the NYC establishment. After jotting down their orders, Lucas headed to the kitchen to relay them to the chef. Days passed in a similar fashion. Initially, Lucas had joined the restaurant to cover his rent, but now he had the means to pay it off. Currently, he was gradually paving his way into an agency. While waiting for the Modern Family pilot to air and potentially catch an agency's attention, Lucas felt he couldn't afford to wait for months before taking action. After singing Wonderwall at the bar, something stirred within Lucas. His desire to become an actor seemed to intensify, fueled by the aspiration to participate in a film project akin to his friend Paul Sterling. Hence, as Lucas worked as a waiter, during his free time or after finishing work, he submitted headshots and his resume to various talent agencies like Innovative Artists and United Talent Agency, directly via mail. He had included in his resume that he had a role in the Modern Family pilot, even though it hadn't aired yet it still counted. Realistically, his resumes alone might not be sufficient to grab the agency's attention. They could easily overlook submissions from aspiring actors. However, Lucas felt confident that he would, at least, receive some notice. Alongside his resume, he submitted recommendation letters provided by Christopher Lloyd. Indeed, after receiving payment and an iPod gift from Stephen Leviton, Lucas also obtained recommendation letters from Christopher Lloyd. Recognizing their significance, Lucas made copies of these letters to accompany his resume and headshot submissions to various talent agencies. While it was only a letter, the talent agency could easily confirm its authenticity by making a quick phone call or recognizing Christopher Lloyd's signature. Thus, Lucas wasn't excessively worried. Originally, Lucas hadn't intended to use the recommendation letters so soon, but his performance at the bar had a significant impact on him. He believed that the sooner he approached an agency, the quicker he would land a project in some capacity. Moreover, his participation in the Modern Family pilot served merely as an augmentation to his resume, which, in Lucas's perspective, was insufficient for him to achieve his aspirations. Several days after Lucas had submitted his resume and headshots by mail to various regional offices of talent agencies like Innovative Artists, a talent assistant at one of these agencies, Michael, reviewed the applications of aspiring actors and actresses. During the process, Michael noticed a particular resume and headshot that seemed to include a recommendation letter. Upon opening and reading it, he discovered that it was a recommendation letter from Christopher Lloyd. Excitedly, Michael informed his workmate, "Hey, we have a talent here who was recommended by Christopher Lloyd." "Christopher who?" his workmate inquired, not catching the name clearly. "Christopher Lloyd, the one who produced the Frasier sitcom and some shows." "Oh? He recommended someone. Yet. Look and read this." As Michael and his workmate perused the letter, they realized that, while Christopher appeared to be praising, there was also a hint of humor in the letter. The talent assistant delved into the person's resume as well. "Well, this Lucas Knight seems to have some connections. Let the headquarters decide." Michael set the resume and headshot aside and continued with his work. Chapter 21, Meeting Again. In the few days since Lucas has submitted his resume and headshots to several talent agencies, Lucas was hopefully waiting for at least a phone call from those talent agencies. Lucas held his new iPhone 3G carefully. This is the first iPhone of Lucas. Even in his previous life, he didn't have the luxury to own an iPhone. It was quite expensive, after all. And of course, he can afford old iPhones such as iPhone 3G up to SIXS or something in his previous life. But considering that Android offers much affordable prices and good performance, Lucas would prefer an Android phone. Of course, even with Lucas's curiosity about having an old model iPhone, he still didn't have such luxury in his previous life. Not to mention, having an old model iPhone in an era where 5G smartphones are pretty common in his home country is quite laughable. But it was different in this current life of Lucas. In this reality, the world was still in the year 2009, and the iPhone 3G was still relatively new, despite being released in 2008. Anyway, Lucas went straight to the restaurant early in the morning. When the restaurant opened, a few customers had already entered, and Lucas saw a familiar young woman. "Wait, isn't she the young woman from the bar?" Lucas thought. Approaching her, he said, "Hey, what brings you here?" The young woman almost chirped in surprise when someone talked to her. Upon realizing it was the young man who had performed at the bar where she worked, she exclaimed, "You're that guy." "I'm that guy." Lucas chuckled, raising both of his hands as if surrendering. "How could I forget you?" The young woman, Samantha, playfully hit Lucas softly on the chest with her hand. Then she exclaimed, "You're Lucas, right?" After saying that, Samantha observed Lucas from head to toe and realized that Lucas was wearing a waiter uniform. Seeing Lucas's faint smile, she remarked, "I didn't know that you are working here, Mr. Lucas." "Yet. Anyway, you're a customer now, right? Have a seat and tell me your order." After feeling a bit happy meeting the young woman once more, Lucas returned to his usual waiter professionalism. "Well, you don't have to act so serious, Mr. Lucas. I'm here to see my brother." Samantha chuckled as she observed Lucas adopting a professional waiter persona. "Brother?" Lucas was a bit surprised, then he heard Leonard in the near distance exclaiming, "Samantha." Lucas turned to Leonard and noticed that the young woman also had her head turned to Leonard. "Brother," Samantha nodded to Leonard and approached him. Meanwhile, Lucas was a bit stunned. He didn't expect Leonard to have a sister, and a beautiful one at that. What's more, Lucas only came to know the young woman's name to be Samantha. Knowing Leonard's last name to be Martin, Lucas expected the young woman's name to be Samantha Martin. Lucas didn't know why, but he felt the name doesn't quite fit. But he was not one to talk, after all, in his previous life, his name was Lucas Calculus. Fortunately, he didn't have such a freaking stupid name in this life, and he was thankful to God for that. Around 8:30 p.m., after serving the few customers, Lucas noticed more people entering the restaurant. In the meantime, he walked towards Leonard and Samantha, who were having a conversation and occupied a table. Lucas heard Samantha talking to Leonard. "Mom was quite concerned about your situation. So she wants me to see how you are faring." Leonard, with an annoyed expression, interrupted, "I don't need my little sister watching over me, all right? Just tell her I'm doing fine, better than before." "Sigh, you're really stubborn," Samantha sighed helplessly. "I'm not stubborn. I'm just an adult trying to be independent, all right?" Leonard snorted. "We both know that's not the case. You just didn't like the man that our moth." "Stop. I don't want to hear about it," Leonard interrupted with a frown. Then his face relaxed as he looked at Lucas, who had turned their back on him and Samantha, seemingly trying to hide. "Hey, how much longer do you want to listen in on our drama?" Leonard said to Lucas, who had his back turned to them. However, Lucas's blonde hair was too eye-catching, not to mention he was still wearing the waiter uniform. Lucas awkwardly turned to face Leonard and Samantha, who had their eyes upon him. He said as he approached, "I swear, I didn't know you two were in discussions of sensitive topics when I just approached." "Don't worry about it. It doesn't matter," Leonard replied, not really caring. "Lucas," Samantha nodded to Lucas in greeting. Lucas nodded and then sat beside Leonard, feeling shy about sitting next to Samantha. But Leonard, with his spider sense tingling, sensed something as he sniffed in Lucas and Samantha's direction. Then he asked Lucas, "What led you to approach us, my friend Lucas?" He felt suspicious as he looked at Lucas and Samantha, noticing the way his sister was glancing at Lucas, sensing something happening behind his back. "Me? Nothing." Lucas shook his head, but Leonard seemed unconvinced. "Really? I think you just wanted to get close to my sister, right?" Leonard said, stroking his chin. "What? No way." Lucas denied with an awkward chuckle. What are you saying?" Samantha was obviously the most affected, she even stuttered slightly. When she saw the smug smile on Leonard's face, she became even more defensive, saying, "Lucas and I just happened to meet in a bar, and there's nothing more to that." Samantha thought that with that explanation, it would clarify everything. However, Lucas and Leonard fell silent upon hearing her words. Although Lucas had no experience with women in his previous life, except for when he was acting with an actress, of course, he still felt that Samantha's words didn't feel right. Sure enough, Leonard smirked when he heard that and decided to tease his sister, and of course, also tease Lucas. He said, "I see. You two have met in the bar. And then?" Leonard's eyebrow kept jumping up and down as he looked at Lucas and Samantha. When Samantha saw that, her face turned red. Not because she was blushing due to having feelings for Lucas, but because of the anger she was feeling at this moment. She felt incredibly angry at Leonard. Seeing him still teasing her, Samantha said coldly, "All right, I'll tell Mom about this." "Go on, I'm not afraid of her anymore." Leonard felt smug, happy that he could finally get back at Samantha. When they were still living under one roof, she was always snitching, and now, seeing her angry, he felt satisfaction building up. Samantha couldn't help but grit her teeth in frustration. Lucas, who saw this, wasn't really sure about meddling in sibling matters, even though it also involved him. "You shouldn't bully your sister." Leonard, feeling smug, suddenly froze. He turned towards the voice and saw it was his cousin, Liza. "Sister Liza." Samantha greeted Liza, and Liza approached her, hugging her. Liza patted Samantha's head and then looked at Leonard, who acted ignorantly, seeming to want to return to work. However, Liza stopped Leonard. As Lucas expected, his friend Leonard received a punishment. Lucas saw that Leonard was genuinely fearful of Liza, and he admired her for that. After that, Lucas and the others talked for a while. "What? You met Lucas in the bar?" Liza exclaimed, a bit surprised. She then said, "Did you two really develop?" Before Liza could finish her words, Samantha interrupted her and explained, no. It's not what you think. You know I'm working as an artist in Alphabet Lounge, it's not a bad bar. I met Lucas there where he performed. She explained that Lucas was performing a beautiful piece of music that he had originally composed. When Liza and Leonard heard that, they looked at Lucas in surprise. Really, man? You can sing? Leonard scrutinized Lucas as he said so. Unlike you, Lucas can act and sing. He's a world apart from you, Leo, Liza smiled as she said. When Samantha heard that Lucas could act, she was actually quite curious, but she didn't think much about it. Lucas noticed that he had the chance to fully introduce himself. He said, "My name's Lucas Knight, by the way." Samantha nodded, and before she could introduce herself, Lucas interrupted. Lucas said curiously to Samantha, "You're Samantha Martin, right?" When Samantha, Liza, and Leonard heard that, they chuckled. Leonard said, "You're getting ahead of yourself, Lucas." Lucas furrowed his brows confusedly and said, "What do you mean?" Leonard didn't answer, but let Samantha respond, who chucklingly said, "My name is Samantha Taylor." When Lucas heard that, he was noticeably confused, but he soon got his answer. "Well, Leonard and I have different last names because Leonard had the last name of our father, while I have the last name of my mother," Samantha explained to Lucas. Lucas nodded understandingly. During the conversation, Lucas learned that Leonard and Samantha's mother had remarried, leading to a split. Leonard took custody of his father's last name, while Samantha took her mother's side. It was complicated stuff. After that, Samantha bid farewell to the others, giving her contact number to Lucas. Although she was teased slightly, she hurriedly left. Lucas then resumed his work as usual, and around afternoon, the customers gradually faded out until it was finally 6 p.m. Lucas's shift was over, so after bidding farewell to Liza and Leonard for the day, Lucas headed out. Just as he walked out, he received a phone call on his new iPhone 3 Guaranese. Lucas hurriedly answered it, hoping it might be the talent agency he was looking for. Chapter 22, IA. Lucas answered the phone call, and he heard a deep voice saying, "Are you Mr. Lucas Knight?" Lucas said, "Yes. I am Lucas Knight. Mr. Knight, I am an agent of William Morris Agency, and I personally reviewed your resume and headshot, along with the recommendation letter from Christopher Lloyd." The deep voice sounded. When Lucas learned it was from WMA, one of the talent agencies he submitted his resume and headshot through mail, he was quite excited and also quite worried as well. But even if he was rejected, there were still other agencies that Lucas had submitted his resume and headshot to. Until then, Lucas was still quite nervous about the result. He didn't have to wait long, as the agent informed Lucas directly without much preamble. "Thank you for your interest in WMA, Lucas. Unfortunately, your profile doesn't quite align with the actors we're currently seeking." When Lucas heard that, although he was prepared, he felt deeply disappointed. The agent seemed to be waiting for Lucas's response, staying quiet before saying, "If there is nothing else, then I'll end the call." Lucas didn't even notice the phone call had ended. He sighed in disappointment, then, after getting out of the taxi, he went straight to his small apartment. Meanwhile, at the WMA headquarters, the agent who just called Lucas snorted, "Humph, even with a connection from that producer, Christopher Lloyd, it doesn't mean you can have your way in our talent agency." The agent didn't use the same kind yet respectful words he had earlier when talking to Lucas on the phone. The agent was Ryan Morris. WMA agency was part of the Big Four agencies, and Ryan Morris, who recently reviewed Lucas Knight's profile, found from Lucas's resume alone that he had almost no experience as an actor, not even theatrical experience. WMA wasn't part of the Big Four for nothing, it had a strong international presence and expertise in film, television, and music, with a significant presence in Hollywood. What Ryan Morris didn't know was that WMA would become defunct in July 2009, being acquired by Endeavor Talent Agency and becoming part of the new Big Four. Back to Lucas, who was preparing his meal: a steak, egg, and some cheap wine he bought. For Lucas, this was a luxury. He had spent some money to celebrate his rejection day today. That's right, folks, Lucas was celebrating the fact that he had just been rejected by one of the major talent agencies in Hollywood, WMA. Lucas pressed his hands together, and with teary eyes, he muttered, "I hope the next call from the talent agency will be positive." About to eat his meal, his phone rang, and Lucas hurriedly answered. After a few minutes, Lucas sighed disappointedly, the phone call was a formal rejection from the United Talent Agency. With a bitter heart, he finished his meal and slept for the night. The sun rose, its rays gracing Lucas's face as he woke up groggily. As usual, Lucas had his breakfast, took a shower, and went to work. Days passed in this manner, with Lucas receiving rejection phone calls from various talent agencies. His last hope rested on innovative artists. Lucas had celebrated his rejection, which cost him hundreds of dollars, but he still had around $7,000, the result of working in a restaurant and receiving tips. So, Lucas could still afford it, though he felt a bit of despair creeping in as talent agencies kept rejecting him despite the recommendation letter from Christopher Lloyd. What Lucas didn't know was that most talent agencies informing him of rejection were already thinking highly of him despite his bad resume. These agencies wouldn't even bother calling someone with a similar resume as Lucas to inform them of rejection. On June 2, 2009, as Lucas was losing hope that innovative artists wouldn't call, his iPhone 3G rang. Lucas hurriedly answered, "Hello, this is Lucas Knight." "Hi, Lucas. I am Vincent of Innovative Artists. Thank you for sending us your information, and I also read the recommendation letter from Christopher Lloyd." When Lucas heard it was from Innovative Artists, he prepared himself, his nervousness bubbling inside. Although Innovative Artists represents established up-and-coming talent in theater, film, and television, it didn't guarantee acceptance for him. "We appreciate your enthusiasm. Based on your talent and dedication written in the recommendation letter, we believe you have the potential to go far. However, as you're still starting out, we recommend focusing on training and honing your acting skills. Consider participating in our recommended workshops and classes." Lucas ignored that, having already gone through workshops and classes in his previous life, but he just go along the flow. "I understand your feedback, I appreciate it." Then, Lucas waited to see if he was accepted into the agency. "That's great to hear, Mr. Knight. We'd love to be a part of your journey. Additionally, Mr. Knight can consider our developmental deal. You don't need to agree now, we can discuss it further later, and whether Mr. Lucas will agree or not will be based on his own decision." Lucas's mind went blank for a second upon hearing that he was accepted into the IA agency. He confirmed, "You mean I'm part of IA now?" Vincent, in his office, sensed Lucas's disbelief just from his voice and said, "That's right, Mr. Lucas. Welcome to IA." Lucas joyfully exclaimed, "Thank you." "Haha, all right. Thanks for your time, Mr. Knight. We can discuss your developmental deal personally. Can I decline that offer?" Lucas quipped. All he wanted was an agency that could provide him more opportunities. Although a developmental deal could offer financial support for workshops or classes and aid in audition preparation, and more assistance from the agency, it was time-consuming and his commitment was needed, and also it usually doesn't guarantee good or important roles. Financial stability might still require additional work or outside support. Moreover, Lucas felt it would drag him down to attend workshops or classes, given his previous life's acting experience. Perhaps attending a few times would be no problem for him, and he might even discover future famous talent. However, a developmental deal mandates commitment to workshops and classes, which isn't ideal for him. Vincent, hearing Lucas decisively reject their offer, was a bit surprised. However, he understood that he couldn't force any young and new talent into the developmental deal. The agency typically offered that deal in consideration of young talent. So, Vincent simply said, "Well, if that's the case, I couldn't force you." Vincent sensed that Lucas seemed a bit arrogant for thinking he could skip the basics. After the call ended, Lucas felt excitement rushing through his veins. Even though his entry to IA was a non-contractual engagement, and he didn't yet deserve to have an agent and didn't even accept developmental deals offered to new talents, Lucas wasn't overly worried. Lucas joined the talent agency with the goal of building connections with future or current famous individuals. Honestly, he felt a kind of relief upon joining IA. He knows the agency for its up-and-coming talents in his previous life. Lucas speculated some actors and actresses he knew who is still starting out to be potentially part of IA, and he may meet them at film festivals, music events, or other gatherings, creating connections with directors along the way. Moreover, the agency could provide Lucas with audition projects and, as mentioned, networking opportunities. Even without a contract or developmental deals, Lucas believed he could gradually earn the agency's recognition with his talent, work ethic, and positive attitude. Besides that, Lucas can receive more convenient assistance from the IA agency for his plan to film a short film to add to his resume. IA could offer significant support, facilitating Lucas in connecting with potential collaborators within their network, including directors, cinematographers, editors, and even actors/actresses for other roles. Chapter 23, Indie Film. Filming a short film would at least have helped Lucas in building his resume. And also, he can showcase his talent even more when he filmed an independent short film, that he directs and writes the script for himself. And as Lucas is from the future, he knows some short films from his previous life. Lucas remembers the short film called 1 Minute Time Machine. It was basically a guy trying to hit on a beautiful woman sitting on a public bench, holding a time machine device. Each time the guy ruined his chances with the lady, he'd return 1 minute into the past. As the film played on, the plot twist was that the time machine was a suicide box. The guy was killing himself to go back to the past, or more accurately, he was actually jumping between different parallel realities that were 1 minute late to the reality he was in. Lucas was eager to film that short film, but it would probably have to wait. He planned to visit the Innovative Artists office in New York, which caters to talents and houses internal lists of upcoming project auditions for films, TV series, theater, and roles available for talents. The headquarters of Innovative Artists Agency is in Los Angeles and New York, with an IA literary office conveniently located in Lucas's area. This IA branch is situated in Manhattan, specifically on the 7th Avenue between 28th and 29th Streets, Suite 2700. As Lucas gazed at the building in the distance, he noted that even though Innovative Artists wasn't part of the Big Four, it still held influence in Hollywood. Surely, there would be available projects for him to audition for. Lucas recalled that some actors and actresses from his home country had signed contracts with Innovative Artists. IA's engagement with talents beyond the USA didn't imply any incapacity to handle the Big Four domestically. In fact, IA could domestically compete with the Big Four given their A-list rosters. The agency's decision to sign talents from other countries aimed at diversifying their unique talents for global projects, discovering fresh talent, and expanding their reach and influence. While Lucas wasn't technically part of the IA agency yet, owing to his non-contractual engagement and the declined developmental deals offers, he understood that the agency had accepted him without a contract as part of an assessment. This assessment was based on Christopher Lloyd's recommendation letters to determine if he was truly worth nurturing. Currently, Lucas had a pre-arranged appointment meeting with Vincent, an IA staff member who had contacted him before. The purpose was for Lucas to inquire about audition opportunities and access limited casting information relevant to someone in his position. Entering the building, Lucas headed to the reception area, where he received a warm welcome from the dedicated staff. "Good afternoon, and welcome to Innovative Artists. May I ask your name and who you're here to see?" inquired a woman receptionist, her voice chiming like a gentle breeze. Lucas introduced himself formally, saying, "I am Lucas Knight. I'm here to meet Vincent Smith. I have a pre-arranged appointment with him." The receptionist nodded in understanding, replying, "I see. You're here for Mr. Smith. I'll immediately inform Mr. Smith of your arrival. Please wait." Lucas nodded to the receptionist with a warm smile. After waiting for several minutes, Lucas observed the receptionist returning, accompanied by a man donned in a formal American suit. He appeared to be in his 30s, sporting a chin stubble, and his dark hair seemed slightly disheveled but arranged. Lucas promptly stood up to greet the man formally. The man looked at Lucas and inquired, "Mr. Knight?" Lucas nodded in confirmation. "Nice to meet you in person, Mr. Knight. I'm Vincent Smith," the man greeted Lucas formally, extending a handshake. Lucas accepted the handshake and smiled, responding, "Nice to meet you, Mr. Smith." Having exchanged formal greetings, Vincent led Lucas to his office. Lucas and Vincent discussed potential roles for Lucas to audition for. As they talked, Vincent, looking at Lucas, said, "To be honest with you, Mr. Knight, you should seriously consider our developmental deals. Without them, you might face significant challenges as a new talent. Moreover, without notable progress in your career, the agency might not consider offering you a contract." Vincent believed that Lucas was perhaps too prideful for his own good. Lucas simply smiled and replied, "Thank you for your advice, Mr. Smith. I'll definitely take it into consideration." Vincent glanced at Lucas, uncertain if the young man was genuinely considering his words. Nevertheless, Vincent led Lucas to an area where physical sheets of papers were posted on the board. Lucas noticed a few people in the room, perusing the papers on the board. Observing Lucas's curiosity, Vincent decided to provide some information. "This is one of the agency's boards to display projects. It's a hub for actors to explore opportunities. Lucas nodded, feeling excited to see the array of papers representing opportunities posted on the boards. In 2009, physical paper breakdowns remained the primary method for casting information dissemination in many agencies, including IA. Vincent, noting Lucas's excitement, kindly reminded him, before applying for auditions, you should hone your acting skills in workshops. Otherwise, you might struggle in the audition process. Upon hearing Vincent's insistence on the developmental deal, Lucas couldn't help but feel a sense of helplessness. Why is this guy so adamant about getting me into a developmental deal anyway? After pondering, Lucas decided to ignore Vincent and instead focused on browsing some project sheets displayed on the boards. As Vincent interacted with other actors along the way, he offered advice to Lucas, who was engrossed in the board, saying, I recommend you choose an easy role that you can handle. It's important not to be too ambitious. Develop your resume first with less demanding roles. Lucas nodded in acknowledgement and replied, I appreciate your advice, Mr. Smith. However, as an aspiring actor, I naturally want to choose roles that I'm passionate about. While Vincent's advice might be reasonable for some new and aspiring actors, Lucas was not an ordinary young and aspiring actor. He had the experience of acting in his previous life. In that life, he portrayed roles with passion simply because he liked them, regardless of their level of challenge or complexity. The intricate acting skills and techniques were something Lucas forcibly learned in his previous life, yet after acquiring them, he still chose to prioritize passion over difficulty. Acting techniques, for him, were tools to assist rather than dictate. Upon hearing Lucas's words, Vincent sensed that Lucas was exceptionally stubborn. Reflecting on it, he worried that Lucas might encounter stumbling blocks due to his obstinacy. After Lucas clarified matters with Vincent, he could now peacefully choose the projects that interested him. Unsurprisingly, most of the projects posted on the board were independent films. Private and closed projects weren't displayed on the board, featuring limited project role auditions and casting information. Presumably, those private and closed projects were exclusively available to the agency representatives. As Lucas browsed, a particular project caught his attention. Upon reading more carefully, he couldn't help but grow excited. It happened to be one of the most well-regarded indie films from his previous life, the project known as 127 Hours. The most notable role available for actors to apply was, in fact, the main character. This is it. Lucas couldn't help but mutter as he directly picked the physical paper sheet from the board. Chapter 24, Preparation. The film 127 Hours was an indie film directed by Danny Boyle, a British filmmaker. Lucas knew that the main character of 127 Hours, Aaron Ralston, had brown hair and hazel eyes, but Lucas still wanted to try and apply for the audition role. And Lucas also knew that applying for the role, he would face strong competition with James Franco, an already established actor in Hollywood. While not an A-listed actor in this year of 2009, he was pretty much an actor with a good resume. And Lucas seems like he doesn't have a chance at all to be able to compete with such an actor. But if he never tries to apply and audition for the role, who knows, right? Success or failure will only be known if he at least tried and did his best, of course. To be completely honest, although Lucas felt that James Franco's portrayal of Aaron Ralston in the film was quite good, especially his performance in the narrow space of the canyon, Lucas still believed that Franco's depiction of Ralston's emotional journey, while effective, didn't fully capture the broad spectrum of emotions the character likely experienced. The film emphasizes Ralston's determination and resilience, but Lucas yearned for a deeper exploration of despair, fear, and other complex emotions. Lucas knew that, contrary to the film 127 Hours depicting Aaron Ralston meeting two women, there were differences compared to the real-life events. Specifically, Aaron Ralston didn't charm the women by almost being a tour guide. In fact, the real Aaron Ralston felt a bit foolish and embarrassed when Christy witnessed him sliding through a rock embankment, skidding on the solace of his sneakers. It was unnecessary, as there was a less risky route that Christy and Megan had taken. From that alone, the main character, Aaron, exhibits carelessness. Additionally, when Aaron and the two women found themselves caught up in saying goodbye, the women invited Aaron to hike out and have a beer, but he opted to descend through the lower slot and attempt a big drop rappel. While the two women hiked out, Aaron chose to explore further, and notably, they agreed to meet around dusk back by Grand Neri Spring. Upon reflection, Lucas observed the film project paper sheets, containing descriptions of the character, scenes, and a dedicated script for auditions. Oh, you wanted to apply for the main role in 127 hours. Vincent noticed Lucas holding the film project paper sheets. Vincent had previously read the project, which focused on the real-life event involving Aaron Ralston being trapped in a narrow canyon. I believe that role might be too challenging for you, Vincent honestly shared his thoughts, aware of Lucas's apparent pride, predicting that the kid would likely still try to audition for the role. Lucas nodded in acknowledgement, surprising Vincent a bit. Lucas then stated, "Despite its difficulty, I feel compelled to take on this role." Hearing this, Vincent sighed and remarked, "Well, do what suits you." After saying that, Vincent disregarded Lucas and engaged in conversation with other talents in the room. Lucas then perused the details and noted that while the film project 127 Hours fell within the independent film category, it received resources and funding from Fox Searchlight and Pathé, a major French film studio. However, Lucas was aware that the British director, Danny Boyle, held creative control over the film. Having watched 127 Hours, Lucas could discern Danny Boyle's distinctive directing style, especially in the sensitive scene where Aaron Ralston amputated his right arm. The gory scene, complemented by well-directed and edited sound effects, left an obvious chill for the viewers. After finishing reading the film project paper sheets, Lucas inquired if he could take them with him. Vincent replied, "You can take it if you want." It was posted on the board to attract talents for the role audition, and they could simply pick the paper application. Of course, the agency still needs to process the information that you've selected an application. Lucas nodded in understanding, conversed with Vincent for a while, and ensured that the information about his audition for the role of Aaron Ralston in 127 Hours would be processed by the agency before leaving the Innovative Artists Building. Vincent didn't see Lucas out, as in his opinion, Lucas was just a young chick eager to rise quickly, but obviously, like a young chick, he was still quite fragile and might end up hurting himself in the process. Vincent believed that Lucas would soon learn his lesson one way or another. Lucas returned to his small apartment, where he sat at the lower bunk bed and examined the paper sheets more carefully. The audition site was actually at the Fox Searchlight headquarters studio facility, located in Century City, Los Angeles. To be honest, it was quite far, but Lucas was willing to travel for the audition. If he managed to secure that role, it would mark his first significant breakthrough in Hollywood. After dinner, Lucas promptly went to bed. Morning arrived in a flash, and Lucas, following his routine of breakfast, toothbrush, and shower, headed to the restaurant. Once again, Lucas informed Liza and Leonard that he would be taking another break from work to audition for 127 Hours in Los Angeles. While Lucas anticipated a complaint from Liza, he didn't expect her usual supportive response. Although Lucas couldn't comprehend why Liza, the restaurant manager, would be so kind and supportive, he increasingly appreciated her. He felt fortunate to have such a boss. Simultaneously, if he did indeed become famous, even with a little popularity, he would make sure to advertise her restaurant. Lucas booked a flight to Los Angeles, feeling the excitement coursing through his veins. During his free time in his apartment, Lucas examined himself in the mirror, striving to practice and embody the role of Aaron Ralston. He was preparing diligently, considering that he would be competing with the established actor James Franco for the role. If Lucas aimed to have any chance against Franco, he knew he could only give his best. Currently, after reading the script provided in the paper sheets, he would rehearse the role of Aaron Ralston while observing himself in the mirror. Chapter 25, Mysterious Encounter. East Village, Manhattan. In the small apartment, Lucas was looking at himself in the mirror, then closed his eyes as he breathed and exhaled. He imagined being Aaron Ralston. Lucas didn't know why, but he felt his surroundings changed. He felt the wind brushing against his skin. The wind sounds like a lone wolf wailing through the towering sandstone walls, echoing with a deep, primal sadness. When Lucas sensed this, he felt something isn't right. There's no way such a kind of wind, or with the wind with such a sound, existed in his apartment. That can't be possible, so Lucas couldn't help but open his eyes in curiosity. However, his initially curious eyes turned shocked. What is happening? Lucas couldn't help but exclaim in shock. Lucas was extremely shocked to find himself in a place he wasn't before, yet he felt the place was extremely familiar. The area has narrow passages, towering red rock walls, and unique rock formations. Lucas also noticed the chirps of insects and the distant cry of a lone hawk. And also the scent of pine needles, the coolness of stone underfoot, the grit of sand in his teeth. This sensation was felt by Lucas extremely vividly. What is happening? Where am I? Lucas was kind of nervous. He certainly didn't know where he was, and he could feel his chest heaving up and down in nervousness. Why are you nervous? Don't you want to act the role of Aaron Ralston more effectively? Lucas heard a distant voice and shouted back, Who are you? Where am I? Although Lucas was a transmigrator, he felt a bit nervous in the peculiar situation he currently found himself in. Then, Lucas saw a figure walking towards him in the distance. As the figure got closer, Lucas looked closely and was shocked to discover that the figure looked exactly like him. Or more accurately, the figure's face and body shape looked exactly like Lucas Knight. Lucas saw the naked Lucas Knight in front of him smile faintly. The Lucas Knight said, Are you surprised? Who are you, really? Lucas asked with a quivering voice. The Lucas Knight simply introduced himself without much suspense. I am the real Lucas Knight. Lucas was a bit surprised when he heard that, but he didn't doubt the Lucas Knight identity in front of him. Maybe it was just his instinct, but considering the appearance of the man in front of him was exactly the same as Lucas Knight and the peculiar situation he was in, Lucas didn't need to doubt the Lucas Knight in this current situation. You don't appear too shocked, I see. The Lucas Knight said, seeing Lucas wasn't overly shocked. Why would I be? I am also a soul that mysteriously occupied your body. Lucas said. Being a soul and being sent to the 2009 parallel world in another body, he felt that the universe is much more mysterious and stranger than fiction. Then, Lucas said, Did you bring me here to take back your body? Although Lucas said that, an obvious reluctance could be detected in his eyes. When everything was falling into place for him, his dream of becoming a great actor, the superstar in Hollywood, yet it was suddenly fading away in Lucas's grasp. The Lucas Knight in front hurriedly shook his head and said, No. How could I? I am already dead, and my soul is also gradually being pulled by a strange force, which means my soul is already being labeled as dead and couldn't attach to my physical body anymore. Lucas's eyes brightened ever so slightly, really. Lucas Knight saw that Lucas was pretty happy, he wryly smiled. He said with a regretful tone, You look happy. Lucas felt a bit bad. After all, the body he is occupying was not his, yet he was the one using it. Then Lucas Knight sighed and said, Well, I know it's not your fault that I died. In fact, I am grateful to God that after I died, your soul replacing mine in my body made it possible for my body to live. Instead of my body rotting in the apartment, it was better for someone like you with a purpose and goal in life to take over it. Lucas was silent when he heard the monologue of Lucas Knight in front of him, and then he asked, Then what is your purpose for bringing me here? The Lucas Knight seemed surprised when Lucas asked that. Lucas Knight shook his head and said, No, I didn't bring you here. You brought yourself here. Lucas was pretty confused and said, What do you mean? The Lucas Knight explained, This place is actually in the deep recesses of your consciousness. Lucas appeared surprised when he heard that. He exclaimed, In the deep recesses of my consciousness. The Lucas Knight nodded and said, That is correct. This is also the place I found myself in after you occupied my body. Lucas was a bit surprised when he heard that Lucas Knight was actually in his consciousness all the time. The Lucas Knight observed Lucas's expression and said, That's right. I was actually quietly observing your life this whole time. Although Lucas felt uncomfortable, he chose to return to the topic. He said, Then how am I able to bring myself to this place, I mean, this consciousness of mine? The Lucas Knight looked around the space, which is a narrow canopy. He then explained, It's pretty simple to explain, actually. When you are truly immersed in the character of Aaron Ralston, your consciousness recreates a place relevant to that character while you immerse yourself with the role. When Lucas heard that, he was quite astonished, and as he surveyed the space, it seemed like what Lucas Knight had said made sense. Now that he thought about it, the narrow canopy looked just like the area in Blue John Canyon. Then Lucas questioned, Then why didn't I have this experience when I was immersed in the character of Dylan? The Lucas Knight simply said, It's because you are not challenged by the role of Dylan, hence, you are less passionate about the role compared to the main role of 127 Hours, Aaron Ralston. Lucas nodded in understanding, and then he said, I see. You seem to have an understanding of this place of consciousness of mine. Did you perhaps cause this strange phenomenon in my consciousness? The Lucas Knight shook his head and said, No. Even I was mystified by how your consciousness works, and also, I just found myself within your consciousness unknowingly. Lucas nodded and said, "Then, what do you think of this place?" He looked around as he spoke. The Lucas Knight shook his head wryly and said to Lucas, "I am entirely unsure myself of the purpose of this strange phenomenon in your mind, but I feel that your consciousness or subconsciousness is actually trying to assist you in your acting." Lucas was a bit astonished as he said, "You mean? This is my ability to enhance my acting in the roles I am deeply immersed in?" The Lucas Knight nodded and said, "That seems to be the case. But I am unaware of many details about this ability of yours." Lucas was filled with great excitement when he saw Lucas Knight's figure gradually fading away. He called out, "Lucas! You're fading!" Lucas Knight felt a sense of complexity as he saw his body in Lucas's consciousness fading. He muttered, "I didn't expect that I'd be gone so soon." Lucas couldn't help but asked, "What do you mean?" Lucas Knight looked at Lucas deeply and said, "It's a great pity that I won't be able to witness your journey in reaching your dream, no, our dream. It can also be said to be my dream too." He knew he would fade and be gone to the afterworld the moment Lucas became aware and explored his ability in consciousness, but he just didn't expect it to happen so soon. Lucas caught on to something in Lucas Knight's words, and he said, "You?" Lucas Knight nodded and said, "That's right. I'll be gone for good." Lucas felt a bit complicated as he witnessed the original owner of the body gradually fading in his vision. Lucas Knight looked at Lucas and said, "If you don't mind, I'll make a request." Lucas just nodded and said, "Sure." Lucas Knight said, "Please don't give up." Lucas didn't expect such a request. Then he heard Lucas Knight say once more, "And please, pretend to be me when you meet my family." Sigh, I hoped that I could see their reactions, especially my father, to see me so successful. Lucas couldn't help but smile wryly. He really didn't have a choice but to assume the identity of Lucas Knight anyway, since it was his current body. Also, he was satisfied with his current name, Lucas Knight. Besides, how foolish would he be to reveal that he was actually a transmigrator, right? Lucas Knight's figure almost became transparent until it turned into nothingness. His last words were, "Farewell, Lucas." Lucas observed with complicated expressions. After being silent for a while as a tribute to the real Lucas Knight, Lucas examined the place. There's no doubt about it. It was the Blue John Canyon. Before Lucas could explore the place further, he felt a sudden and overwhelming exhaustion, and Lucas seemingly fainted in the spot. The moment Lucas opened his eyes, he found himself still in his apartment. Lucas felt drenched in sweat and was breathing heavily. Was that experience real? Lucas couldn't help but mutter, his eyes reflecting deep shock.
Thanks for listening.